Did you think that because you knew Destiny and just yapping really fast that you would be a good debater? The thunder is not the definition, you idiot.
Then why are you appealing to them in any way?
To prove the history of the movement.
I don't need the history lesson. I don't need the history lesson.
This is how stupid you are. Do you know what? You have no clue what you're talking about.
You're so desperate. You're like, God, how do I get this win?
When we went to God, God didn't ever give us a feminist society.
Yeah, but I don't.
By your own admission.
Actually, I think by my definition of feminism,
Are there 3 waves of feminism?
There's 4.
Okay. So there's 3.
Oh, you didn't know that. That's crazy.
So there are 3, correct?
Wow. This is crazy. I won.
So we got a wild debate today between Jay Dyer, who is Sam Hyde's co-host, and NotsoErudite, who is Destiny's ex-co-host. So we have a Sam Hyde versus Destiny proxy battle that we're going to go through today. This debate goes off the rails so fast and is just unhinged. And I think both of these people end up looking not good. So just give this video a chance. This video just gets more and more insane. And I've taken the most insane clips and I have put them together. So if you're on Erudite's side, I want you to watch this and let me know why I'm wrong about thinking that she's not on point. And if you're on Jay Dyer's side, I want you to know how he possibly came out looking good. Because, I mean, different people at different times look okay, but they also both look insane at other times. And so I want you to tell me who won, and I'm going to tell you who won, and I'll give you the real answer. So we're going to keep score, and we're going to decide who won between Jay Dyer and NotsoErudite. Let's go.
Feminism finds its origins in French revolutionary philosophy, which led to the first wave, I should say. French revolutionary philosophy with Mary Wollstonecraft and others posited the idea of absolute equality in society based around the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity, all of which were revolutionary at the time and sought to overthrow not just the church and not just the state or the monarchy or a patriarchal society, but all society, all areas of life had to be revolutionized.
We're going to skip most of the intros because they're kind of boring and, I want to save you some time. But suffice it to say that Jay's stance is feminism bad. And he gives a lot of good reasons. Okay, feminism kind of bad. Okay, but he'll put the cutoff different of when it became bad versus Erudite. Erudite thinks first wave is kind of good. And Jay thinks that the whole thing is just corrupt from root to stem. So you think they'd be able to agree on a lot of things, especially with everything from third wave feminism onward, but it ends up getting unnecessarily heated. It's almost like they want to find division points, as we'll see.
I basically would grant you lots of that stuff. I would essentially argue that feminism is not only a necessity, it's unavoidable. I think that's where society tends to go. I think women joining the workforce, while there's lots of cons with it, one of the biggest pros is the massive boost to GDP and just the competitiveness of every nation that includes women. And overall, I think feminism is broadly good for society, but I am sure that I would be happy to talk with you about a number of areas that I think have been harmful for society. I think feminism has been co-opted and often twisted. I think particularly in the third wave, we saw this by what I would call gender opportunists. And so when I think about feminism, I'm more interested in a feminism that is centralized around empowering women and promoting femininity.
And that's basically the gist of NotsoErudite's intro, which makes a weird amount of sense. And this is what you'll see the tension here, because going into this, you see guy on left in the whatever podcast, you see girl on right, and you kind of know who's going to do good. Okay, I don't mean to be biased. It just is, I'm noticing a pattern. But in this event, it just isn't the case. And so I want people to take NotsoErudite's point seriously, because watching this, it just seems like she has good points. Her whole starting spiel seems fair. I think that women joining the workforce is just obviously inevitable. It seems impossible to keep women out of the workforce. So we can look back and we can see that, this has caused homes to be based on a 2-income dwelling, and this has caused, problems in the workforce. So we could say all of this stuff, but it's an inevitable problem that's not going to go away. And there's almost no point in talking about it, because we can push back against third wave. We can certainly push back against fourth wave and fifth wave and whatever else the fuck is happening. But to go back to try to undo and uncork the genie back to like first wave is just not going to happen. And so you think they would have common agreement on what is the bad parts of feminism, but yet they still find so much to argue about.
Feminism, I define it as the empowerment of women and promotion of femininity. Do you agree with that, or do you have a very different definition of feminism?
I think of it as something necessarily tied to revolution, and I think when you say the word empowerment, it's also ambiguous, because that could be a lot of things in different contexts. So I don't know what you think empowerment is. Okay,
so by empowerment, what I mean is typically going to be, I'm a very big freedom of opportunity person, liberal. Guilty as charged. So empowerment would be eroding any obstacles to disadvantages or inabilities to take opportunities that other people would have. That would be one way of empowering someone.
See, I understand liberal is a scary word, and while I would not identify myself with such a scary word, I understand what she's saying. That type of empowerment does seem incontrovertible. If we're just removing barriers and removing obstacles, I honestly don't know if Jay, how much he disagrees with that, or if he just wants to disagree because the topic is like feminism versus not feminism, and feminism becomes the specter of badness because it is a specter of badness and has a lot of bad things to it. But Erudite's thing is nuanced enough, and she like despises large enough branches of feminism that, again, there should be like more agreement here, and they're coming from very similar places, and they should be able to criticize similar things, but it just doesn't happen.
Most CEOs now, this was again about 10 years ago, are now women. That we're reaching some tipping point, that there's a large majority of women that are now CEOs. Do you think that's good? Is that fair? Because I would see that as a revolution against male authority.
I see it. I am very dubious of her claim.
Yeah, there's just no way that claim is true. I mean, I'm saying that before I'm looking it up, and I will look it up, and I'll put it, probably here because there's more space, and we'll see if it's true. It's not true though. Otherwise, I'll look like an idiot. Hey, did you like this video and subscribe to the channel? You should definitely do it. Okay, we'll continue.
Here's something we probably agree on. Most of the positions of power in our society are occupied men because men tend to be more extreme. Like they're just more extreme in bell curve, like genetically. And they don't often take time away from work with kids, so they have a little bit more time to dedicate. So we see at the highest levels of trickling to the top, men typically occupy those roles. I'm sure you and I would agree.
Yeah, but when you say extreme, again, this is a very ambiguous term. Extreme in their views, extreme on the bell curve.
Sorry,
those
I
are
melike
two
genetically.
things.
So because of the Y axis specifically, so I don't know if you know anything about IQ research, for example.
I know some about that. Yeah.
So men, while like obviously the average IQ for men and women is 100 because it's normalized, men tend to occupy a bit more of those extreme spaces. They're both the lowest and the highest IQ. And we see men doing that all the time. They tend to just have more extreme genetic traits, both for success and for struggling, right? That's why we tend to see men overrepresented on both sides of most things. So that's why men often will trickle to the top of most workspaces, for example.
And you think that's because of extremes of IQ?
Well, not just IQ. That would be extremes of multiple things. And also, I think I said...
You said IQ a minute ago.
Yeah, IQ would be one thing. I just don't think IQ is the only thing that would predict you trickling to the top.
So what are the things that led men to be in those positions other than IQ?
Probably just the ability to work. Like they don't take time away from work for children. Their wife typically does that.
Could there be anything biological?
Well, IQ,
would that be biological?
IQ would be something biological,
It's partly biological, but I'm saying like in terms of what a man is biologically, is that anything to do with what might be roles in society, hierarchy?
I don't think there's super good evidence that like testosterone predicts like anything other than like aggression towards those like equal or lower.
Okay, so to start off, we do got to give a point to Jay, because obviously there are biological factors beyond IQ that would create these differences between men and women. And Erudite, maybe because she's so into the psychometry aspect of things that she knows the IQ stuff, she doesn't know the other stuff. Obviously, testosterone is going to predict your aggressiveness levels, but that obviously is going to apply to like a workplace context and could apply to other things. And it, of course, could also predict more negative things, like she's saying, like violent behavior. But obviously, there is going to be hormonal differences and brain differences between men and women that are going to cause variations, and I think are going to map onto those extremes on both ends in the same way that they do with IQ. And so, point to Jay. Okay, we'll give him a point where a point's due.
Muscle distribution is part of biology, right?
Sure, I just don't think like muscles get you to the top of a Fortune 500
What about
company.
like being a soldier? Does that help?
And now I got to give a point to Erudite. What is being a soldier? Obviously, that's like the one for sure area that any sane person could agree on, is that being a male soldier is going to be probably better than being a female soldier on average. But like, why pivot to that from the CEO thing? There's like a lot of things I think you could say on why men are more likely to be CEOs, both cultural and biological, right? I think it's both. I think obviously, yeah, there is going to be some systemic issues that cause women to not excel in the same way.
You guys are clearly not doing patriarchy very well.
No, no, we're doing it well. Yeah, we just hide it better now.
Oh.
Or maybe a cutthroat attitude, or women just don't have that dog in them. I don't know. There's a lot of factors, okay? So there was a lot of areas that Jay could have gone, and he didn't, and instead pivoted to soldiers. And so a point to Erudite.
Okay.
That's why men are significantly better soldiers than women.
But what about that high IQ that group of high IQ, does that help get them to the top of the CEO ladder?
That would definitely help. I think it's like a 45% to 60%
And you admit
predictor.
that that's partly genetic?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So it seems like, naturally speaking, when I appealed in my opening statement to what's natural and biological, men are just sort of fitted to those things. Their very constitution
Yeah, they often
is
trickle.
for those things.
Yeah, it's just with in 2025 with women having birth control and tampons, there's less obstacles to that, so they might trickle to the top too. And I just want a society that would allow them to do so.
But why? That's what I'm getting at is, if this is biological and thus, quote, natural to a degree, according to what you're arguing, what's the need for women to do what is then perhaps not natural for them to do?
Can we take a point away from either? Is that possible? Because like the tampons and birth control, I think that's like kind of a silly point. I mean, obviously, like it's a part of women being able to have more opportunities by having choices over their reproduction. But that's obviously like a small part, I think, of what's happening. I think the better argument that Erudite could be making is that even if men are better suited on average, let's say that's true. Okay, for any feminists watching, I'll concede. Okay, let's say it's even, you know. But if we do accept that on average, men are going to fill the more extreme roles of rungs of society in both IQ and in other ways, then you are naturally going to see more male CEOs. So why wouldn't you just say, well, yes, even if this is on average better suited, why would you then stop the opportunity of women to rise to the top?
Excuse me, mister. Yoo-hoo. Hi. Thanks for giving women the vote.
On average, a 30-year-old would be a better CEO than a 20-year-old. But do you want to like actually legislate this or somehow enforce this or like really socially reinforce this idea that a 20-year-old can't be a CEO? Obviously, you want to create an environment where, yeah, the people that are best suited for something will rise to that level and the people that aren't won't. But you want people from every strata to have the capability of that. Like the right's supposed to be for equality of opportunity, right? And I feel like that would be an easy thing for her to point out. But Jay seems to think that on average, because men are this way and women are this way, that then there should just be like a top-down rule or some type of top-down social enforcement or something like that. I just think, why have that?
Because there are lots of women that are still in the high IQ realm that are very capable, that make excellent bosses.
So exceptions make the rule?
No, more like freedom of our opportunity, right? That's my premise.
Okay, that is kind of what I just said. So I guess we'll give Erudite back her point, okay?
There's a standard, which you would say that's a net good for society if women are able then to interject themselves into that male space.
To be allowed
that's
to.
That's a good?
Yeah.
Why is that a good?
Like I said, innovator scale.
What?
Innovator scale. More people means more innovators. You just get the best of the crop.
More people. Mm-hmm. So we should have more people in society?
Sure. I don't know if this is connected to birth rate.
Well, yeah, because the more people in society would then back up what you're arguing, right? But don't we need more husbands and wives to have more people?
I mean, we obviously want to reinforce the idea that like having kids is good.
Don't worry about that, baby. I love babies, so I like it. What a baby. Actually, I was only kidding. You can get the baby out of here.
Because our birth rate sucks in like every developed nation. But also, we don't want to eliminate half the population. I mean, the truth is not everyone is going to have kids, and you don't want to force people to have kids in some type of social way and prevent women from the workforce. Like, this is such a brain dead thing that I think we see on the right with people like Andrew Wilson, which, you know, I might get a lot of hate for that. If people want to work, they should be able to work. Even if we want to have this idea of like a trad wife thing and we want to go back to this like more nuclear family where the woman stays at home with the kids, which I think is a good idea, that shouldn't be like enforced in some way. And it shouldn't be like so heavily pushed that there's no opportunity to do the opposite. Like, obviously there's going to be exceptions, there's going to be edge cases. So I don't know what Jay wants, because he says he doesn't want to ban it, but then like, what does he just mean? Does he just mean we should do a groundswell to just encourage people to be like stay-at-home moms and stuff? Because I don't know if Erudite would even really disagree with that.
Yeah, I just don't think these things are mutually exclusive.
How can a wife be a CEO and also raise the kids?
Tampons, birth control, like supporting.
So tampons and birth control raise the kids? What do you mean?
Okay, a point to Jay, because yeah, I don't know why she's harping on about the female reproduction as being like the main thing that's going to cause the difference here.
Lots of women find a way to both raise children and work.
Well,
shared parenting, like the husband takes roles. Sometimes they get babysitters. Sometimes there's intergenerational families. There's multiple ways that women share the load of parenting.
So that's a net good?
It can be, yeah.
Okay.
Freedom of opportunity.
What is the standard for good here?
Do you mean like at an epistemic level?
At any level.
Good as
In your worldview, what determines the good?
So in the case of what we're talking about, I talked about the innovator scale. So the reason I like women being able to have access to opportunity is because it improves GDP.
Okay, so the net good for society is just what? More fiat money? Like what determines that?
Yep, GDP is a good thing. Do you disagree?
Yeah, I do.
You don't think
first
GDP
of all,
is good?
like what if the money is a scam?
See, a point for Erudite. What if the money is a scam? I'm not even sure how to really parse that. I'm assuming that he thinks because we left the gold standard that like it's some like one of those ideas that money doesn't exist and stuff. But obviously gross domestic product exists and leads to measurable things in people's lives. Now, I also don't think that just numbers go up equals a good thing for society. Just because, Netflix is worth a ton of money.
That's why we're not winning, is because Netflix stock isn't high enough. I want to kill my neighbors and them alive and up my car, but it's okay because Netflix is worth $3 trillion. That's the most retarded thing I've ever heard.
And because these stock prices go up, it doesn't necessarily mean that people are like living happier, more fulfilled lives. So I take that point.
But what does it matter if it's Barbie or Ken? The money is pouring in.
Shame on you, executive number 2. You think I spent my entire life in boardrooms because of a bottom line? No, I got into this business because of little girls and their dreams. In the least creepy way possible.
So no, just because X country has high GDP, it doesn't necessarily mean that there'll be a better off society than a country that has worse GDP, but it's obviously one predictor of their overall state as a society. You can look at broad countries and you can compare countries with high GDPs to countries with low GDPs. On average, countries with high GDPs, you would rather live in them more than countries with low GDPs. There could be exceptions.
Trump Gaza shining bright, golden future, a brand new light. Feast and dance, the deal is done. Trump Gaza, #1.
But that's just an on-average thing, and we would apply that on average to everything else, like we do with the men and women stuff, and the differences between the sexual dimorphism of the genders. But then when it comes to this issue, for some reason, we just think that GDP is a scam and money's a scam and none of it matters, and the stock indices don't matter and none of it makes any difference. And obviously they make a difference. They're just not the end-all be-all. They're not the ultimate good, which I think that's what Jay's going for here, but Erudite is just saying it's good. She's not saying it's the ultimate good.
Our country's income is presently based on pure debt, right? Is that a bad thing?
Our GDP is not based on debt, no.
It is. Well, the whole system is based on debt. Gross domestic product is not itself debt. I'm saying the economic system itself is based on debt.
Yeah, like
because it's
MTN.
a debt-based system.
Yeah, like modern theory of like money is very debt organized. It's just like debt is not this like boogaloo scary thing in and of itself.
No. I'm talking about our system is fiat. It's not attached to anything hard. There's no hard currency that our money is attached to since the shock doctrine of Nixon.
Yeah, so it's like every other country in the world. I don't even know when the last time a country was on the gold standard. I think it was on in the 70s. I'll put it here because it was a long time ago. And so if every single country has moved away, this is the problem. You have to either believe that like the whole thing is a scam and the whole world is in on it and is somehow still working, but it'll eventually collapse, or you got to just think that something about fiat currency just does work because it's been working for decades and decades now in literally every country. And so either we are going to collapse at some point, or the conspiracy theorists are kind of wrong on this one, and the whole thing isn't a scam. And just because, yes, everything is technically debt, and that's how our fiat currency is made, that doesn't actually matter.
So I'm just saying your highest quality was the best GDP in society. So your organizing principle is a neoliberal economic theory. So what I want to know is, even if that's itself based on debt, then what's the source of the good here?
So in this case, what is good for society is having a competitive GDP so that your enemies can't stomp
That's
you.
the highest good?
That's not the highest good. That's the good of what I'm talking about in the case of women entering in.
What is the
innovative
highest
scale.
good that determines that that's good?
Are you talking about morality?
Just at all. In your system, you tell me what your system's standard of good is.
So I'm not really sure why we're having the epistemic conversation.
Why not?
Because it feels like we're losing the plot of the conversation.
No, I want to know what your standard of the good is.
Again, what do you mean by good?
You said that the GDP is necessarily attached to the highest good.
I didn't say highest good. I said it's a good thing.
Okay, then I'm asking you what the highest good is that determines that the GDP is better than not caring about GDP.
So you're asking for my moral foundation theory?
Sure.
I'm a divine command theorist.
See, so there's so much going on here. This is what I was saying. You think they would have more agreement. I mean, she is a Christian, and it depends on what, she means exactly by that. But she's willing to say that her morality comes from God, and she's willing to say that GDP is not the highest good, it's just is better, and he's asking for some moral reason on why that's so, but that's such a confusion of the planes, because something can be good in an effective way and something can be good in a moral odd way, and those two things are not the same. The QWERTY keyboard is easier for me to type on than a Dvorak layout keyboard is. Would I say that one is better in the moral sense?
Sweet dreams.
There's semantic overload with the word good here, right? Like the keyboard is good in the sense that I'm trying to do something on it and I can do it better on a QWERTY keyboard. And in the same way, a higher GDP is good for a country for many reasons. And those could like tie into moral reasons in the sense that they could affect morality and they could have moral inputs come in. But like GDP itself, obviously having a high GDP is just an effective thing. And it's the same with fiat currency. It's like, it would be hard to argue that that's a moral good. It's just like, it's a good way to do things. And then, like I said, that could lead to things downstream where, yes, if you have more money, then you can like take care of your citizens better and you can lead more healthy lives. And there's downstream moral effects, but it's hard to say that the system itself is either morally good or morally bad. It's just, it's amoral, not immoral and not moral. It's just not in the category of morals.
From what divine command?
The Christian God.
And he says GDP is good?
No.
Did Moses come down and talk about
I don't think GDP is moral.
You just said it was the highest good.
I didn't say it was the highest good.
This debate.
No, I said it's good for society.
Then it's moral if it's good.
I don't think it's moral in this case.
If it's good, it's moral.
Well, you can have good as in
good
functional.
is a moral claim.
Well, of course, you can have functional claims, right?
So if it's only functional or if it's only pragmatic, then it's not ultimately a good. It's just subjective.
I got to give another point to Erudite. This guy has a degree in philosophy. I know it's a bachelor degree, and I have a bachelor degree, and it doesn't mean I'm an expert on what my major is in, but it is weird that he is making these, what seems to me to be basic philosophical confusions, because obviously it should be clear that there is semantic overload going on here, and what she means is a functional definition of the word good. He's the one intentionally trying to go to morality, and then she's saying my morals come from God, and he's saying, well, does God say to have GDP? But those are two different uses of the word good. And I hope she clarifies this better, because this will make the conversation be a lot easier if she does.
What's more important for a nation state than GDP?
The health of the society.
Sure, but if the health of society is really high.
I mean, could you have, let me give you an example. Could you have a society that's a mass addicted to drugs, but has a good number, a nice income?
Probably not.
No, you can have societies that are full of detriment, like full of ghettos, and they're ruled over by organized crime that make a lot of money.
Okay, now point for Jay, because obviously we could imagine a society where most people are unhappy and their GDP is high. Oh, wait, that's like all of Western society. So obviously, yes, there doesn't have to be a tie-in. But to Erudite's point, yes, on average, you're going to see those correlations between countries that have bad GDP are usually like whole places to live, and countries with good GDPs are generally good places to live. But obviously, one does not just like lead to happiness, and one is not just an indicator that, oh, this is definitely a healthy society. It's just a indicator that this society is probably better than the one with like a shit GDP, right?
But I'm saying conceivably you could have a ruling elite that makes a lot of money from drugs, and the society itself is living in shantytown, right?
I don't think that nation state would have high GDP. I don't think there's any evidence
it doesn't matter if you think that, because it's conceivable that you could have that, right? You could have a successful oligarchy that makes a lot of money, and the people themselves don't do very well.
Another point for Jay, even though maybe you could argue this ties into like his point from before, but I'm going to give him an extra point, because yeah, obviously China has a high GDP. I don't want to live in freaking China. You could imagine, like he said, you could imagine a society where maybe you have a ruling class and they bring in a ton of GDP and they're, let's say, exploiting most of the population in some capacity. And so their GDP is good, but most of the citizens are incredibly unhappy.
Well, at least I got a steady job. No!
Cannot cause a high GDP for the country. There's a lot of hypotheticals you could think of, and not hypotheticals because there are countries like that exist. You know, hypothetically, you could have a country that's, you know, trying to erase the weaker Muslims, for example, right? And then so that is not necessarily a great country, but their GDP could still be high, and they could also have no free internet, and they could also have a lot of human rights abuses, you know, but GDP high, so country good, obviously not. Okay, so yeah, Jay gets that extra point.
Well, but if I'm arguing for a moral ought on the basis of
this is not a moral ought.
It is. You said it's a good. If you said something is good.
I said it's functional.
Yeah,
what word? Okay, we're doing chatter.
So
what
now
word do you want me to use when I say functional?
No. In a debate, if you're arguing for your position, then you're necessarily arguing that we ought to follow your position.
Yeah, I think I said
so
it's
it
a
is an ought.
necessity and an unavoidable. That doesn't
So
mean
it
it's
is an ought.
It doesn't mean it's a moral claim. It would be like realpolitik.
Well, then it's an ought, because do you think we ought to follow your
Not all
arguments?
oughts are moral.
Okay, point for erudite, because again, this is just confusion of morality with function. Because yes, I would say if someone's like, "Oh, what keyboard should I use?" I might be like, "Oh, again, use QWERTY because that's what you're used to, and it might be really hard to switch over." And maybe someone else would say, "But if you do switch over, Dvorak is actually better." Okay, I've been thinking a lot about keyboards. Okay, leave me alone. The point is, I wouldn't be giving them an ought. If someone said, "Ought I follow your advice?" I'd be like, "Well, if you want to type at your maximum capacity, then maybe follow my advice. But if you don't, then don't." This should be like obvious to anyone. If someone's like, "What smartphone should I get?" and you're like, "Well, these are the advantages of an iPhone," and someone else is like, "These are the advantages of an Android," neither of them would say like, "You ought to follow my advice in a moral sense." What they would be saying is, "You ought to follow my advice if you want a smartphone that's right for you." This is like not a confusing thing, and it shouldn't be confusing for someone who's a philosophy major. Okay, it just shouldn't be.
This isn't a moral claim.
You just argue that we ought to follow your position. That's
It's still not a moral claim.
It is.
It's not.
Oughts are morals if you're extending them to everybody in the theoretical realm of listening to the debate.
All oughts are not moral. This is every ought doesn't have to be a moral. That's just like on its face true, and it's philosophically true. This is such a weird argument for him to make.
Do you think that GDP is moral?
Everything in life is conceivably or potentially moral.
How is GDP moral?
Because you extended it to, in this argument, the highest good.
I did not.
You walked it back after Ash for the highest good.
No.
Yes, you did.
I did not.
You
I said for a
this,
nation state, I guess it's like one of the higher goods. Yes. It's not the highest good. And I've said...
Okay, so, and what is the good?
Jay, I don't know how to explain to you over and over that this is not a moral claim. It's realpolitik.
You're saying that?
It's pragmatism.
You're saying that, but ought we follow your argument in pragmatism here?
If you want a flourishing society by and large.
So we ought, logically.
Sure, but
Ought we logically?
It's not a moral claim.
It's not.
Is GDP a moral claim?
It can be, depending upon
How?
the system.
How is GDP a moral claim?
In your system,
How is
you're
moral-
arguing that what you just said we ought to follow your arguments.
I don't know how many times to tell you this.
Yeah, but
I'm not
you're
making
confused.
a moral claim.
You are,
I'm
and you're
not.
saying you're not.
You're just keep telling me that
Anytime
I
you
am.
say that there's an ought,
That's not true.
that is true.
No.
It is.
No.
Even if you redefine it as
Okay,
functional.
how about this? You don't
because-
have to have a liberal society that has a high GDP. You're just going to get stomped and you'll be a failed nation state.
I don't even know how you would make the argument that Jay's making with the highest ought for society when it comes to functional things. Every prescription he has for a functioning society, would he really commit to those being oughts? Because surely if you asked him, he would have a bunch of things that a society should probably do to be like better off or worse off. But that seems crazy to think that like all of those things are like moral claims. That if you were like propose a policy that every policy that you make, every economic policy, every tariff that is a moral thing, that the tariff should be at 13% and it morally ought to be at 13%, as opposed to just looking at like, hey, what actually will like work out best economically. There's all these things, right? There's always arguments that you could make when you're looking at like trying to make something function well, and to tie all that into oughts. Just that you could think of infinite examples. Okay, I don't need to pretend that you're a stupid viewer. You are very smart viewer because you're watching this channel right now and you're watching this video. This is also philosophically true. No philosopher would say that every ought has to be a moral ought. There's obviously, again, semantic overload going on, and I don't know why. So point to erudite. I'm sorry, okay? She just gets one.
Debate necessarily comes down to metaphysical claims and epistemical claims and ethical claims.
No.
Yes, it does.
We
because
can- so we can go
feminism
there.
is about morals, ethics, biology, society, social relations. You can't divorce ethics from that. Now, if you think you can, I'm happy to address that, but that's just going to get you in an even deeper bind.
I'm not saying that you can divorce these things. Of course, feminism
you just
has moral
argued a
claims.
minute ago that it's not moral.
GDP is not moral.
Okay, I'm trying not to get triggered by Jay, okay? Because again, I think I'm predisposed to be more on his side, okay? I make a lot of content about the Whatever podcast. I think I'm more predisposed to be on Jay's side than freaking erudite side, okay? But the stuff he's saying, it's just he's confusing the whole argument now. They're talking about GDP, and yes, there's no oughts in that, and he's like, well, so there's no oughts in feminism or any of this discussion? No, obviously, yes, feminism is her ought claim that society ought to do feminism from a moral point of view, and probably she'd argue from a functional point of view. But the conversation moved into GDP and if GDP is good or not, and now he's like, oh, because you think that GDP is only functionally good, then you're contradicting yourself. And it's like, no, you're talking about two different things now.
Okay, so then how does your nation state and your worldview protect itself from enemies?
It has a standing army.
Okay, and how does it fund that standing army?
Well, nations have gone into debt, or they have been prosperous and used their own treasuries, or they have raised money to go to war. So there's a lot of different ways that could happen.
Okay. And so what do you think is the right way to do that?
It's an oversimplification question, because not everything in regard to warfare or history of civilizations is necessarily right or wrong. It's a question of what might be the best or the worst. So there can be scales.
Excuse me? So it's not necessarily right or wrong? It wasn't your whole thing that if you're going to say that you should do something, that it's has to be a moral component to it? Now he's saying that it almost sounds like there's like different ways of functionally paying for a military, almost like that could be an issue of function and not morals, as in maybe the best way to pay for an army is something you ought to do, but not in a moral sense. There might just be the most optimal way to fund an army. What the hell?
Would you say that there are some things that aren't moral necessarily? Some of them are just pragmatic, and then there's some things that are moral?
Everything could potentially be moral, but some things are pragmatic, sure.
Okay. That's basically what I've been saying.
Okay, so he concedes, which I mean, good. If you're like down a rabbit hole, I'd rather someone concede than just like keep digging themselves further in. So like, okay. I was almost gonna give him a point, but that's some soft bigotry of low expectation. Okay, that's the least I expect from a debate. Okay, so I was gonna give him a sympathy point, but no point.
I'm trying to figure out your position on the good.
My position on the good is it's holistic. There are things that are good because it's functional, and there are things that it's good because it's moral, right?
Is the debate today, feminism, about the good of the moral for society?
The topic of whether feminism is good for society, I think broadly would come down to function, and it could come down to morality, and it could come down to some other things. It can be variegated. Everything doesn't have to be the same one-track thing, okay? I feel like that should just be clear.
The problem with this conversation is that essentially what you've done is you've assigned me a bunch of positions that I don't have.
No.
You've done a bunch of circle talk about words. You've done a couple of rhetorical flashbangs. And now we're stuck in the situation where we can't actually talk about the ideas, which is unfortunate because I was really looking forward.
You're chasing, you're like one foot is nailed and then the other one is going in a circle, like a cartoon. You're like a cartoon character running in a circle.
See, I think Jay thinks that he's like winning this debate, but if you look at the score, I mean, which is objective, I mean, he's just not winning currently. And I think he thinks that he's cooking, but I don't think he is. And again, if you are a Jay Dyer fan, then let me know if he's cooking and let me know why I'm crazy, okay? Because I don't see it. I think what Erudite said here is true, that he is just assigning positions and fighting with them. And now he thinks he like has her, but he doesn't have her. He has this trap card that he's activated that he thinks has somehow like caught her, but it really hasn't. And now he just thinks that he's like doing a victory lap, and he's not. And they need to reset and like start from scratch because they have not built toward anything yet.
Is for society, because we have a lot of historical Christian societies.
Sure.
Were any of them feminist?
No, but I don't think in general that God advocates really strongly for a political system.
Really?
No.
What about when Israel was organized? Was that a political system? What did they have?
In 1948?
No, in the Old Testament.
In the Old Testament.
Okay, I got to point to Jay. I mean, because I don't. If Erudite was trying to make a joke with the 1948, then I would think it's funny. But I don't think she was making a joke. I think she was not understanding where he's going with the theology here, and so I think Erudite probably needs to brush up on her biblical knowledge, if I was to be honest. Okay, so a little critique there.
What does the Old Testament say about how God organized that society?
He gave them prescriptions about how to run their life from Moses.
How was that society organized?
It was organized, I believe, in a patriarchal society with matrilineal heritage.
And it was a monarchy?
Yes.
A male monarchy?
Yep.
Okay. So, in that regard, God was not feminist, right?
I've never said that God was feminist.
Well, I'm asking if there's a history example of where God organized a feminist society.
I mean, I don't want to get too lost in sauce, but there is example of like female judges that stepped up and stuff, and the kings. There's only certain kings that were actually like chosen. I don't actually think that broadly the Old Testament was an example of God organizing a political system. I think that was probably just God intervening with the political system at the time, like because obviously monarchy pre-existed Judaism, right? And so if there was a democracy at 1000 BC, then would he have been like, no, King David needs to be king? No, if there was like a democracy, then maybe God would be like, King David needs to be president, right? Like I feel like God kind of works in the culture that is happening at the time. So I don't think you can look at what's happening and be like, oh, this is de facto right. I mean, as a low-hanging fruit example, obviously slavery exists in the Bible. And I think what we see with the Old Testament commandments is you see God working within that system. And yeah, you can debate if you want about like why he didn't overthrow the system and all that stuff. But I think it's obvious that God is imbued into the culture that is happening at that area of the world at that time, and is obviously doesn't seem too concerned with overthrowing the economic and political system. So the fact that they were using monarchy for a long time before this, and then God comes in and like appoints like King David and then King Solomon and stuff, I don't think that's an indication that like God loves monarchy, because why wouldn't we do it with monarchy then? Should we say, and maybe Jay would, I don't know, maybe he would say that monarchy is what we should be doing because that's how the only society we know about in the Bible was structured, as a monarchy. It's like I don't know, we don't apply that to anything else, right? With everything else, we're just content to say that's how the Jews live because that's what the Jews did back then. That's the society they were in when God came down to them. I'm not going to give a point to Erudite because she'd make a good point. The Erudite needs more biblical knowledge, and Jay needs to understand the arguments that he's saying more, in my opinion, in my humble opinion.
I mean, it's interesting because when you look at like ancient Judeo history, if you're not being presentist, it was like insanely progressive compared to like the pagans around them, like the Assyrians and Babylonians.
That's not what I'm asking.
Well, it is what you're asking.
You're calling
right?
it progressive, and I would just say it's healthy. So the fact that they,
sure,
had,
yeah,
they had the Ten Commandments.
God seemed to advocate to some degree for a better treatment of women than any other society
I
around
agree.
them.
But that's not feminism.
To some degree, you could argue that it is if you agree with my definition.
I actually agree with Erudite here, okay? And I don't know how far she could justify this, but I actually will give her a point because I do think that's one thing that we see continuously throughout Scripture is we do see a degree of progressive revelation. This is talked about in theology, okay? This isn't some like heterodoxical take, right? Like we can see kind of an arrow going up between, very like rudimentary morals, and then we see like better understandings and better morals happen throughout the Old Testament, right? Into the intertestament period, and then we get into the New Testament, we see even further increase in morals. So I think it's fair to see that, like, look, with an example like slavery, you see slaves being like allowed and, being the system is just kind of expected to run on slave. And Paul says that there's neither slave nor free and that everyone is the same under Christ, right? So you have a progression of morality. I understand calling it progressive is like a scary word, but you do see progression. And in the same way with like the treatment of females throughout the Old Testament, I think you do see that arc going too. Now, it's always a question of like trying, because we don't have a Book of Mormon, we don't have a modern testament. And so it's always a guess of like looking at the beginning of the Old Testament, throughout the Old Testament, looking into the New Testament and thinking, if that kept going, where would it go? Because we probably don't think it should just stop there, which is why we made things like slavery fully illegal, right? We think that shouldn't even be a choice at all, right? We take these biblical motifs and the biblical progression and we follow kind of the curve upward, and we try to see where it would end up now. I think that's broadly understood as like an acceptable thing to do and a proper thing to do.
I'm not agreeing that Old Testament patriarchal society is feminist. You just admitted it's not.
If you're not agreeing, why did we even define the words at the beginning?
Can you name a feminist society
I'm not
that God advocated?
I'm not interested to.
You appealed to God.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing to treat women well.
Did God ever? That's not feminism. Now you're equivocating.
I'm not equivocating.
Yes, you are.
How am I equivocating?
You're changing, moving the goalposts as to what feminism is.
That's a completely different
so
fallacy.
If God has,
equivocating or am I moving? Hold on, am I equivocating or am I moving the goalpost now?
It's both.
You're
both. Equivocating on the word and moving the goalpost to make your position work. So if there's no feminist,
that's not what equivocating
if there's no feminist equivocating on the word.
That's not what equivocating means.
I know what equivocation means. Yes, it does. It means that two different understandings of a word. You're equivocating on the word.
Okay.
Feminism. And you're defining to say that if God in the Old Testament gives women rights, that's feminism. That's not what feminism is. Feminism is a modern movement, post-revolutionary philosophy.
Then why did you agree to my definition of feminism?
Because it's so broad that's fine if you want to defend that against patriarchy, but I'm arguing patriarchy against feminism.
So
and
all
what
you're
you
doing
appeal
now
to
is moving the goalposts by originally agreeing to a definition of feminism, and now you're saying that can't work anymore because it's defeating my argument?
The Old Testament God and the New Testament God are the same God, and they never institute a feminist society. And women's rights are being made in the image of God, that women are protected now. in that status
What do you mean
is
by a
not
feminist
feminism.
society? What do you mean by a feminist society?
A matriarchal society
I'm
or,
not advocating
or a
for that.
non-patriarchal society.
I've never advocated for either of these things.
I think that at least the way Erudite has been describing it so far, right, which is having the ability to have opportunities as women and, you know, the empowerment that she's talking about, you know, not what normally gets called empowerment. Again, all these words are like cucked beyond all belief. But I think that that is something that could exist within a patriarchal society. Like, our society, is it feminist right now? Right? Like, that would be a good question that I want Jay to answer, because obviously we still live in a patriarchy under like any definition of that word. We live in a patriarchy, you know, and I think that's fine. And we also have aspects of feminism that have, you know, has made life better for women. Right. And like, so I feel like you can have two of those things at the same time. I would never define myself as a feminist, because I think obviously that has so much baggage, and the movement has become so, I think, destructive toward women. So in that sense, I agree with Jay, but definitions are important, because what I think Jay hears when he hears feminism is a specter that is a lot broader and more scary than what Erudite is saying. And I don't know whose fault that is, because they both needed to define this better, but I think that's the result we're in, where they're talking past each other throughout this entire phase of the conversation.
Judaism is the most progressive approach to femininity of all of the
modern
ancient
rabbinic
religions.
Judaism is not the same thing as what's in the Mosaic Law.
You asked for Old Testament examples, which I just gave you one.
That's not rabbinic Judaism. You admitted that it's a patriarchal society that's a monarchy.
What do you mean it's not rabbinic? You don't think Old Testament Judeo like?
No, it's not.
It's not
different.
rabbinic. What are you talking about?
It's not the same thing as rabbinic
Judaism. You don't think
Judaism.
that the 1200 BC society that was erected by King David wasn't a rabbinic society?
Rabbinic Judaism comes out of the 4th and 5th century when the Babylonian Talmud is collected and collated.
So you don't think that the Old Testament
is not rabbinic? No.
Okay.
Okay, see, this is what I was talking about with Erudite and the biblical knowledge, okay? Obviously point to Jay. Rabbinic society, obviously, no, did not exist before the time of the writing of the New Testament. That's just like that. That's a little bit of an embarrassing thing, but I get that, you know, this isn't a theology discussion, okay? It's not a religion discussion. So these things happen, but still point to Jay very much so.
You have moved the goalpost.
I have not. I
from
wrote
what
it down.
Feminism is.
I wrote it down,
to be
and you agreed to it.
Anything that. So is the goddess feminism?
I don't know what the
goddess worship in the ancient pagan world, is that feminism?
It might be.
Okay,
I'm not
thank
sure.
you.
I don't know anything
so your
about.
View,
Hold on.
So your position is so elastic that it could encompass any
then
possible
why did
position.
you agree to it?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to give a point to Jay there, because that is a good point. If the definition of feminism is just any type of empowerment, well, it is hard to see why that would exclude things like third wave feminism and the things that Erudite doesn't like, right? Like that, the definition of it is hard to really suss out, because like if you ask me, am I for the empowerment of women? It's like, depends what that means, right? Like, I don't know. Empowering women to like start OnlyFans, I don't think that's a good thing. Empowering women to be able to pursue what they want to do with their life in a broad scale, well, I think, okay, that's a good thing. You know, empower women to be able to, you know, get out of the horrible circumstances and elevate themselves in society. Well, yeah, then okay, I'm for that. You're going to say feminism is good. You'd have to couch it so much, but then it's like, it is hard to know how to exactly talk about these things when feminism has become such a broad, amorphous term, which again is why I would never define myself as a feminist. Maybe if I was like living in like the, you know, early 20th century, maybe I would, right? Maybe that word would hit different, but like it obviously hits different now. But the problem is all this stuff is like vibes based, because it's so impossible to pin down. It just becomes utterly just, you know, what does this word invoke inside you? And obviously it's invoking something different inside Jay than it is inside Erudite. And it's invoking something different inside me than it probably is invoking inside you, dear viewer. So we probably disagree right now.
If we want to go back an hour, you agreed to this idea of chatter, right? How we want to define concepts, agree to them so that we can talk about
Women
ideas.
prattle or chatter? I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
So
this is where Jay's cocaine kicks in, which is why he puts on the sunglasses. Okay, I know what's happening, Jay. And, you know, this is where things are going to go really off the rails.
Statement, I said that I believe feminism is a revolutionary philosophy that destroys society. It was brought about to change society in toto and ultimately to serve into oligarchical designs and people who, and I gave sources. You can read the Rockefeller's authorized biography. They have a whole discussion of Abby Rockefeller funding third wave feminism in cell 16.
Sorry, how is this not just as ambiguous as the one? It's just a revolutionary
Just as ambiguous.
system?
I'm literally giving you the people who funded it and the actual names of the people, like cell 16.
I don't know why you're appealing to. I don't know why you're appealing to authority right now. None of this matters.
No,
I'm
that's
asking
not an
for a
authority.
definition.
That's the people involved. It's not an authority appeal.
Yeah, if the people
You don't know what an
who you
authority
think
appeal is.
funded them is an authority for the
I gave
definition
the
of
people
feminism,
involved, like Abby Rockefeller,
that
who
would
was
be an
herself.
authority.
No, it's not.
Then why are you citing them?
It's a person who's in the movement. It's not just the funder.
Yeah, you're appealing to authority.
You
right
don't know
now.
what an appeal to. That's a fact. It's not an appeal to authority. You don't know what an appeal to authority is.
You are citing them
This is so
for a
silly.
definition of feminism.
Yeah, that's not an appeal to authority.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
Yes,
you
it
don't
is.
know what an appeal to authority. If I said my position is true because I cite the Rockefellers, that would be an appeal to authority, and
You're
that's
saying
a fallacy.
This definition
this is an evidence,
true
goofus.
because of the Rockefellers. If you want,
No, I'm not. I'm telling you
If
the
you wa-
history of the movement,
that
which
has
you don't
nothing-
even know
again,
about.
I've asked you to define feminism, and now
And
what
I'm
you're
giving
doing,
you the history of that movement,
I'm
which
asking
is
you for a
three
definition.
waves.
Why, I don't
Are
know-
there three waves of
Doofus,
feminism?
why can't you give me a definition?
Are there three waves of feminism?
There's 4.
Okay. So there's 3.
Oh, you didn't know that. That's crazy.
So there are 3, correct?
There's 4.
Right, but that would mean there's also a 3, even though there's a 4th, right?
That's true. 3 is less than 4.
I
Good
know
job,
that.
Jay.
But the fact that there's 4, there's still 3 that have happened, right?
Irrelevant to anything
Irrelevant.
modern
Wait a
feminism.
minute. Is that an appeal to authority?
Okay, see, I told you the cocaine was kicking in. Now he's like in aggro mode. And, point to Erudite because Jay's trying to cover up the fact that he didn't know there's 4 waves of feminism. But you would not say 3 if there's 4. Jay would have never said, oh, the 2 waves of feminism. Feminism has 2 waves. And then if she said, oh, it has 3 or 4, he'd be like, well, 2 is also included within 3. Okay, that's like some like biblical hermeneutic stuff that people do to try to make, things not contradict in text. Okay, so this is a little silly.
What authority am I citing right now? I know
Well, you're citing facts that you think are appeals
Which
to
authority
authority.
have I cited? Name one. Name one authority I've cited, Jay.
You think-
Go. Name one authority I've
You
cited.
don't understand
Jay,
what,
name
I'm
one
making a
authority I've
joke.
cited.
I'm making a joke because
What's
you
the
think
authority I cited?
appealing to a fact is appeal to authority. Those are 2
That's
different things.
not true.
Yes,
In fact,
it is.
when you were citing
If I talk
Rockefeller,
about-
when you're
listen,
citing
this is
Rockefeller
so stupid.
as the definition for feminism,
No, the
I'm saying you're appealing
funder
to
is not
authority.
the definition, you idiot.
Then why are you appealing to them in any way?
to prove the history of the movement
Do you know
and
what an
what
appeal
it
to authority
teaches.
fallacy is? Brian,
Yes,
do you know what an
I
appeal
just
to
gave you the
authority fallacy is?
example.
Okay.
I've been debating for 25 years. I know what the appeal to authority is. That's one right there.
Yeah, this is getting off the rails. I told you this is going to be an insane debate, okay? They're not talking about everything that could possibly be contained in feminism, but that's also why this argument's hard to have because it's hard to precisely define these things.
I'm not asking for the history. I'm asking
You
you to-
said it is historical,
I'm
so I
asking
have to go
I'm
back to the
asking
people.
no,
You're so dumb
no,
that you can't conceive of a
if-
position
okay,
apart
here,
from
watch.
the people
I'll do something
who came
different.
up with
Watch,
the
watch, watch.
position.
I'll do so. Israel. I can define Israel without
What does this
going
have to
through
do-
the entire history of Israel. Feminism, while it
No, you
does
can't.
have,
Actually,
yes,
you
of
can't.
course you can.
No,
because
this
for
is
the
so
sake
silly
of conversation,
because you
we have to
admitted it's
agree
a
what
historical
construct is.
movement. Therefore, it can't be divorced from the people in history.
I'm not asking
Do you
to
think it
divorce
came
it.
out of the sky?
You're
Did it come
again,
into
this is a
people's
false
minds out of the
dichotomy.
sky
This
or
is a
from the
false
people?
dichotomy. You're doing a false dichotomy again.
What are you, dude? You don't
You're
even.
you're
this is
acting
so
like
crazy.
you're acting like you can't define it without the history. I'm telling you.
Correct. It's a historical movement by your own definition.
That doesn't mean that you can't make a definition for the word,
Yes,
so
you
we
have
can
to
just
go
talk
to the
about
people.
it.
Where do you think words come from? From people.
That
They
doesn't
don't
mean-
drop out of the sky. They come
Jay,
from people.
Jay.
Yeah, this is just an insane point. And a point to Erudite, I have to give her one because yes, you can obviously define someone without going through the entire history of the thing. But I understand what he's saying because his definition, this is why definitions are important. When he's talking about feminism, he's talking about the entire movement. So yeah, if you're talking about a movement, then the history is important. But then I don't know why he would say to define Israel, you'd have to go through all of its history. Obviously, that's not true. To talk about anything would just become absolutely insane, right? Like to define capitalism, I'd have to know the whole history of capitalism. I'd have to know exactly how everything unfolded and how we got to where we are today. That's obviously silly. No one would apply that to any other thing. But he's trying to say you'd apply it to a country. So for me to know the definition of any country, I'd have to know their God knows how much history they've had and every conflict they've been in, every little autistic squabble they've had with their neighbors. I don't need to know that. You can define something without knowing that stuff. But I get if he's defining for movements, it kind of makes sense. If you're defining something as this whole thing is a movement, then, well, a movement by definition moves and, you know, is going to change throughout time. So then you do need to know the history, but she's not defining it as a movement and he is. So you see how this gets complicated, but I still got to give the point to Erudite because I just think he's committing to stuff that he doesn't need to commit to. He's trying to die on hills that nobody would die on.
I know you can do this. You can define a word without giving me a 5-minute monologue on the history.
No, you can't.
So there's no way for you to define feminism.
Would you go to a dictionary? That's an appeal to authority.
Okay, another point to Erudite. I think Jay needs to calm down because I think he's making some arguments that I think in normal conversations he would not make, and I think he's just getting debate brained and then just thinking he has to make these things. But I don't think you would actually make those arguments that any word you use you would have to know the history, and then also that a dictionary is an appeal to authority. I mean, like. In a sense, for certain things, obviously the dictionary is not the best source to use, right? It gives a good colloquial definition of a word, but doesn't necessarily give you like the full nuance of that word. But it's not if I don't know what a word means and I look it up, that's not me like appealing to authority in a fallacious way, right? Like that's not what an appeal to authority is when it comes to a logical fallacy. There are fallacious ways to appeal to an authority, and there are non-fallacious ways.
Civil rights. Let's just call those civil rights.
That's not civil rights. It's oh my gosh! It's prior to the civil rights movement. You idiot.
That doesn't mean that it's not civil rights, Jay. I'm just trying to create a way to make this succinct so we can get a fucking definition because you don't like mine, which is fine.
I said yours.
That's why I'm just trying to now get a new
broad.
one. That's fine. Make your own.
I'm giving the historic. I don't need my own definition.
Yes,
it's
you
your
do.
position, you goofus.
No.
You debate positions like when you debated Jim Bob, and you tell people to define your position. This is how silly you are.
No, Jay.
See, I think they're both just lost in the sauce, okay? Because I do think that, yes, her definition is too broad. So I'm not going to give a point to either. I'm not going to take any away because I think, emotions are high. Okay, tempers are flaring. But ultimately, I think that her definition is too broad. But it is such a cop-out to then not define it on your side. If you're going to say feminism bad, then you also need to define it. You can't just say, well, it's not up to me to define it. I feel like this is like a presuppositional tactic that people will use in debates, and I just don't think it makes any sense. It's like, it's so easy to just tear down someone else's position and just be like, well, I'm only critiquing your position, so I don't actually have to forward one of my own. It's like, you kind of do if you want a discussion to move forward, right? Like, unless this is like high school debate club, which like these things, they shouldn't be like that, right? We should be trying to like move the conversation forward, have interesting, nuanced discussions, right? But like, everyone's so obsessed with like scoring points, and it's not helpful for any of this. It's just really not.
You gave a broad definition.
I gave you a definition, and you
which
don't
is too
like
broad.
It. That's fine. Make your own definition, and then we can work from there.
I don't need to make a definition.
Yes,
it's
you
not
do.
My position.
If you have rejected my definition, you now have to supply one.
Yes, I'm going to the people who came up with it. Correct.
Rockefeller didn't come up with it.
I said Mary Wollstonecraft in my opening statement is one of the first feminists in modern society.
Do you want to supply a definition? This doesn't matter, Jay. Just make a definition.
So the people who came up with it don't matter.
They matter if you can get to getting a definition out of your fucking mouth.
The fact that it's such a broad movement means that, yes, you can't look at any individual person. So, like, I agree with Erudite here. I also agree with Jay that if he's going that far back, which he did, then it's like, yeah, that probably is a good indication. And, like, if you're going to talk about a movement, you do have to talk about the people that played integral roles in it, right? But, again, this is the problem. They just need to define things better. But she's trying to do that in Erudite's defense, and so, but everything is just so off the rails. I feel like it's almost like impossible to like comment at this point because it's so hard to there's so many steps that they've gone wrong, okay? And I don't know who to blame for this, maybe a little bit of both of them, okay? But everything's gone so wrong, we'd have to peel it back layer by layer to actually get to like who's more right at this point. So we're just gonna have to like take it as it comes and just take each point as it comes and see if it's a good point, because trying to look at the overall thing, everything's just too cucked right now, okay? It just is.
You might not believe me, Jay. I'm so disappointed about this conversation. I talked about chatter because I was interested in a good discussion.
You keep saying chatter doesn't have anything to do with the fact that I did an internal critique and you didn't know what that was. And then I start going to the history of feminism and then you're floundering.
Right now. You're just saying
I'm just
stuff
saying
right now.
stuff.
Yeah.
There we go.
So going to chatter, the reason I asked you about it is so that we could have a decently good conversation, so that we weren't quibbling over the definition of words and we could actually engage in conversation. If the only way that you can debate for the last 25 years is to just quibble about semantics of words, I'm sorry, you're not a king debater. You're just bad faith.
You asked me for the last 30 minutes to define a word. So you're the one that's quibbling about semantics.
I'm
that's
not
semantics.
quibbling. I'm literally not quibbling. I am writing down your words.
Oh, so if you're writing it down.
I'm granting, it's not semantics because I'm just granting your definition.
I thought it was semantics. No, it's not.
It's not semantic debating because I'm not disagreeing with you on your definition. I'm literally begging you to just give me one. I'm begging you at this point.
See, and this is what I mean. This is why this discussion is just so bad. And if I was erudite, I would be disappointed in this too. And this seems to be the trend. And part of me does blame the Whatever podcast a little bit for this. Okay, as much as I love the debates on here, but it's like the Andrew Wilson mentality of like, I just have to give an internal critique and I never have to go into mine, and just and the whole like debate bros scoring points, and Andrew Wilson admits he does blood sports, but the problem with doing blood sport debates is that you never really get to anything with the person you're talking to. Like, it's all just ends up being a show for other people, which I think in Andrew Wilson's defense, that is what he wants to do. And I think Jay Dyer is of the same camp, but it's like, it would be so much nicer if they would actually talk and be able to make progress, because again, I think they do agree on a lot of the stuff. I think they agree on a lot of points. And so it would be refreshing if they could just take a step back and actually, engage in good faith and not just try to like kill each other. And I do put the blame obviously a lot more on Jay. Okay, I understand erudite can be triggering. Okay, I watch her and sometimes I get a little triggered. Okay, I do. She can be very grating. I don't know why, but in this discussion, it's just like, I feel like anyone watching this has got to agree that Jay is just going way too unhinged, is not defining his positions, refuses to define them, just wants to tear down hers, and doesn't even want to create a good dialogue at all. And that's just a problem for a debate.
I don't care about it because
but now you've rejected my definition of feminism. So again, I know being mean to women is your fallback if you have nothing else to do.
Ad hominem now, so there we go.
It's not an ad hominem. I didn't say that you're
mean to you.
No,
I
didn't say you're wrong because you're being an asshole. I just said you're an asshole.
Now you're getting your feelings.
That's not an ad hominem.
Okay, it's not an ad hominem. I got to give another point to erudite. I don't want to be given so many points to a side that I disagree with more than the other side, but I just have to. Okay, I am above all things fair. Okay, and yeah, it's not an ad hominem. Is not just insulting somebody that you could argue maybe it's a colloquial definition, but especially her just saying that you're mean to women. That's like at the best, that's like an insult. But that's not, an ad hominem is when you're trying to discredit someone's argument and then based on some characteristic of them. It's not just like calling them a name, I think. But the internet has gotten a bit confused on that. But Jay, I got to hold him to a higher standard. He's got a philosophy degree. He should at least know the technical meanings of these fallacies, right? Is that too much to ask? I don't think so.
Okay, so we have 5 points that you would like to define feminism. Is there any other points that you want to define feminism with?
Yes,
Is there anything
the people
else?
who funded that also said that they like the movement because it destroys the nuclear family, gets women in the workforce, taxes the other half of the population, and reduces the population because there's less families.
See, and that's fair. At least we're getting a definition from Jay. So I have hope that things are going to be moving in a good direction, because there is a lot of negative stuff that the early feminists said that I think is like cancerous, right? Like the destruction of the nuclear family, right? But it's not all feminists that would hold that. And erudite, obviously her type of feminism, based on her being a Christian, she doesn't think the nuclear family should be destroyed, right? Like that's obviously not what she's going to say. So there's some like quixotic things of like fighting windmills here where the opponent is not here. The princess is in a different castle, Jay. Okay, like you're acting like this is like the ultra third wave feminist sitting in front of you, but it's not. And he needs to zero in on what she actually believes so they can have a productive conversation, because maybe we're gonna get that. We'll see. Probably not though.
Okay, I would argue that the destruction of nuclear families is not inherent to most feminist movements and is bad. So I reject that part of your definition.
So the people who want that in society and say that it does that don't matter. Because
they're not the feminism that I'm fighting
because
for.
You have a definition that is so elastic to make it anything that you think helps women.
See, I got to give a point to Jay there, because yes, I don't think that her definition of feminism is narrow enough to exclude the points he's bringing up, because yes, there are feminist people at the beginning of the movement and onward into the present day that do talk about the destruction of the nuclear family. And so she's like, well, I don't support that. And yes, she doesn't. But then her definition, right, is just proven to be too broad, because they would say that the destruction of nuclear family is empowering to women. And if Erudite's definition is empowerment of women, then that would be a part of feminism. So, but again, this is like a hard thing to talk about. So I don't necessarily blame her, but there has to be a more concrete definition for both parties to attack.
I would say most fourth wave feminists, for example, are not very pro destruction of the nuclear family. In fact, there's like an entire like barefoot pregnant movement within the fourth wave that is very much about embracing being pregnant, being motherhood, and like promoting that as a good thing.
Is that the attitude that most feminists in society have?
I would say a lot of young feminists are directly.
But are they the most?
I wouldn't.
No, they're not.
Most also don't want to destroy the nuclear family.
Well, in academia and in
most
society
feminists
in general,
want to get married and have kids.
Does this worldview promote, in general, in society, in academia, and in the corporate world, the destruction of the family, or does it help it?
It tends to promote it, yeah.
Okay, yeah, obviously point to Jay here. That's an insane thing that now Erudite is committing to, insanities that she shouldn't need to commit to. But she is. Obviously, yes, most feminist thinkers and speakers are not promoting women to have kids. That's just like on its surface, not what's happening. Now, could you say that like most people who probably call themselves feminists are like, yeah, if women want to have kids, they should be able to have kids. But like, if from an academic point of view, that's a hard stretch. That's a hard stretch. I don't know if she's just saying that because he's saying nonsense, so she's like, I might as well say nonsense too. Either way, point goes to Jay. Okay, fight about it in the comments if you disagree with me.
So you've got a nuanced feminism, I guess, is your take, right?
I just have like a pretty traditional like fourth wave feminism.
Okay, so but it's not historic feminism, right? Or is it first wave?
It's fourth wave.
So it's tied to history?
Of course, because there's waves.
Oh, so it is tied to history.
Yeah, but the waves,
but
the essentials of the waves is that there's. I've never ever said that feminism isn't tied to history. You've just made that up.
I think we could go back about 20 minutes. So you can do what I do. You know, we go back 20 minutes where you said that the history doesn't matter.
I
and
said
you need
for
a
your
definition.
definition, it doesn't matter. You can hold
you
frame,
just
Jay.
Literally,
you can do this.
You have doublethink going
hold your
on.
frame.
Have you read 1984?
You can hold your
frame.
frame.
Have you read 1984? Right.
Yes.
You know what doublethink is?
Yes.
It's the ability to contradict within a couple minutes.
I didn't
and
contradict.
It just goes,
if you remember, we can roll back the tape. We were talking about defining.
Do you think definitions are relative?
Can I finish my thought, or are you just going to interrupt me?
Because I'm trying to.
Can I finish my thought?
I'm trying to hone in on
thought?
what this weird mistake is, because it's weird.
Guys, if we can at least, we'll let the insults go. Okay, if you guys want to insult each other, we'll allow that. But at least let each other finish their thoughts. Go ahead.
Okay.
I don't think I've seen Brian have to step in so much into whatever debate before, okay? When I said this was the most heated, I was not lying. This is just out of control.
I reject that there is a definition, divorce from history.
I've never said that there's a definition divorce from history. I said I don't need the history.
Because you asked
I said
me,
I don't need the history lesson. I don't need the history lesson.
You asked me for that.
You got to let me finish, Jay.
You asked me because you're lying. You asked me for that divorce. You said divorce from history. What is your definition? That's what you said.
Yeah, I didn't want the history
lesson. Thank you. So you just contradicted yourself.
No, I didn't contradict myself.
You're
Jay.
a machine of contradiction.
You're desperate. You're so desperate. You're like, God, how do I get this win?
See, we're just in nonsense land. At a certain point, when a debate gets this insane, it becomes entertainment, which maybe that's what we have to treat it as, okay? I think Erudite came for a legit discussion. I'm starting to doubt that Jay did. I'm not familiar with Jay Dyer, okay? I don't know what he's normally like. If this was like Alex Stein, I'd be able to at least like understand and be like, okay, this is entertainment. You know, this isn't really, there's serious stuff, but it's mainly entertainment, as anyone who's seen Alex Stein knows.
Elon Musk got the booty. African American with the plan. He doesn't give a damn if you're white or tan, because he is a white African.
But like, so is Jay Dyer that figure? If you know Jay Dyer, let me know, because if this is a sincere attempt to have a debate, this is terrible. If this is meant to just be like bombastic and absurd, then yeah, I'm down for it. But I just don't know which way to take it because I'm unfamiliar with them.
You don't have the brain capacity to define something without a 5-minute monologue about the history.
You just admitted you can't do that.
Define Israel. Are you going to go back 3,000 years to define it?
Yes, because it's an ancient historical nation. Yes,
so you can't define Israel without giving me a 10-minute monologue.
It's a false analogy because feminism is a modernist movement.
Okay, Jay, is it a false analogy, or do you have to define Israel going back 3,000 years? Which one is it? You said before you committed that you could not define Israel in words without going through its entire freaking history, and now you're saying it's a false analogy. I agree it's a false analogy because you could say Israel's not a movement, it's a country, and a movement by definition moves. You could say that, but you didn't say that. So you can't just freaking say it now. That's not how things work, buddy.
Matter just shows your lack of intellect. Is not at all a false analogy. analogy, extents
You
being
are
different.
melting down right now because you contradicted yourself
I'm melting
within
down
2
because
minutes.
you said that you had 25 years of debate history, and you can't get a single fallacy
Look at
correct.
you. You're melting down.
You said
You're
a false,
spiraling.
How is that a false
You're
analogy?
melting down.
How is it a false analogy, Jay?
Because it's a modern movement. It's not an ancient civilization.
Okay, but point for Jay. Okay, he was lost in the sauce, but he's corrected himself, and now he is distinguishing between a country and a movement, and a movement needs to be defined by the history of the movement. So actually, okay, point to Jay. He's correcting it, and Erudite isn't backing down. What both parties should do is acknowledge that you can define certain things with definitions, and you need history for some other definitions. And they should both agree that with movements, yeah, you do need to have historical understanding to know if you agree with a movement or not, because otherwise you're just looking at an isolated snapshot in time of a movement of the particular branch of the movement you like. And if you want to do that, that's fine, but then it should be about like fourth wave feminism, or it needs to be more precisely defined. It can't just be feminism, because feminism itself is a movement, and so it does need to be defined. So yeah, okay, I give Jay the point. Okay, he gets it.
Right.
So part of debating is holding frame.
Like putting dongs in your mouth. Is that holding frame? I don't
No,
understand.
that's funny.
Okay, neither of them are holding frame. Okay, I mean, but yes, Jay lost frame, if we're going to use that word, before Erudite did, and now they're both into nonsense, which, I mean, I don't know. If I was sitting there trying to debate Jay, and I'm obviously not on Erudite's side for like a lot of what she's saying, but I am on board with more what she's saying for her sensible sides than what Jay thinks. And yeah, if I was debating Jay, I don't know if what's the strategy here when someone is acting like this, right? When they're arguably coked up with their sunglasses on and, and just going crazy and just, talking over you. I don't know. What do you do back? You can't like have a sensible discussion. It's like a pearls before swine situation. There's just, I don't know. So is Erudite acting correctly? It's hard to say. It's kind of chaos, right?
We have Intel Wild. Oh, it's coming in as a TTS.
Intel Wild donated $100. Not so bright. Do you like BDSM because you were getting spanked by Jay?
Ah, classic. When you can't defeat a woman, you just have to
like when you do the
dongs
dongs in your mouth like that. Is that a good example of what you're talking about?
When
I can't defeat a woman, so you put dongs in your mouth because it's funny.
You can't defeat a woman without sexually degrading her and then making a joke.
Like when you put dongs in your mouth. Is that sexually degrading?
That was myself.
Oh, by yourself. Okay, right. So it's all subjective, like relativism.
Usually you can make jokes about yourself that other
Do you believe in
people
relativism too?
Yeah, I do.
Really? Mm-hmm. Is it self-refuting?
No.
Is relativism true?
But depends on what you mean by true.
Is everything relative?
Yes, but that doesn't mean it's like subjective.
It means the same thing. Yeah,
no, it does not.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, okay, another point to Erudite. Relative and subjective don't necessarily have to mean the same thing, although they could, but they don't have to, right? Things could be relative to each other, but they could still be objective. In fact, I think that morality is relative, but I wouldn't say it's subjective. It's relative to the circumstance you're in. It's relative to what you think is right at the time. And there's a lot of stuff that could make a decision either moral or moral because it's based on the information that you have at the time and what your intentions are. But I wouldn't say that's subjective. Subjective would be just saying that like, oh, what's right for you is right for you and what's right for me is right for me. And I would never say that, but I would say that morality is relative in that sense. So don't misunderstand me there, but I hope you can see what I mean. Given your information, you might think this is the best course of action, and maybe it's actually the wrong course of action. But in the moral decision you're making at that moment would be a relative moral decision that would be objectively right or objectively wrong, but it's still relative.
Definitely
the opposite of relativism is objectivism.
It's absolutism.
It means the same thing.
No, it does
yes,
not.
it does.
No, it does not.
You have a problem with words
That's
that you
crazy.
think that two different words can't mean the same thing.
Okay, moral absolutism is when you can apply things universally. Objectivism
Correct.
is that something can be like capital T true. These are not the same thing.
You can use the terminology. You're arguing
These
over
are
an
not
idiot.
the same
Yes,
thing.
they are.
No, they're not.
Moral objectivism, what is that?
Moral objectivism is believing that there's like a capital T true that you can find. Yeah, that's not the same thing as absolutism.
No, it's not.
Kant is more
moral
like an
objectivism. You don't know what you're talking about.
Yes.
Moral objectivism is that there are moral absolutes. It's that simple.
No.
Yes.
No.
What do you mean no?
That's crazy.
Okay, point to Jay, because that is true. There's confusion, I think, with objectivism because it can be meant in like the Ayn Rand sense and it can be meant in other senses. But what he's saying now is true. So I'll point to him. I hope you're following at home. Okay, it's getting into the weeds philosophically. And they're both saying stuff that is wrong one minute and then right the other minute and confusing the terms in many ways. And some of these terms are used synonymously in some contexts and sometimes they're not in other contexts. It just depends.
Do you understand that a word can mean different things in different contexts? So if I say that something is morally objective, or that it's morally absolute, or that it's not relative or subjective, it all means the same thing, even though it's different words. Did you know that?
That's crazy.
See, I don't even know what to give a point to. Because like what he's saying is true. You can have different words for the same concept, but you could also have different words for different contexts, and those things are not in contradiction. It just depends what you're talking about, which is why definitions are important, because objectivism in one sense is different than objectivism in a different sense. And that's why I hope I didn't lose you with the moral relativism thing, because when most people say that, what they mean is that morality can change, and what's wrong for you might not be wrong for me, and vice versa. But then there's a different type of moral relativism, which is, I hope, what I conveyed to you, and I hope you can see why those two things are different. But if someone used the word relativism in a different sense, they wouldn't be wrong. They're just using that word in a different sense. And so points to neither, I guess. I don't fucking know at this point.
I think like white men in general are being like pretty shittily treated by society right now. I think there's like a fair bit of like persecution. So I suspect that the reasons behind that is bad. But maybe it's neutral, but probably it's bad. But maybe it's neutral.
See, look, you see, y'all watching, you probably hate Erudite. You know, she's sticking up for the white man, okay? Don't you love that? Don't you love that? Come on.
Feminism is intrinsically antinatalist.
Yep.
I just disagree.
Okay.
Good job.
Thank you, Rachel Wilson. Appreciate that.
It's almost like there's lots of camps to a large movement.
So it's elastic. Exactly. Thank you.
Yep. To some degree, yeah, we would agree that there's heterogeneity within any movement.
Right. So it can be defined the way you need it at whatever point in the debate,
I
right?
defined it really clearly. Like
very
really
broadly,
clearly.
So that you could move it later. And it
And
didn't
why'd
work.
you agree
I'm sorry
to
it didn't work.
Why'd you agree to it?
Because I was setting you up to lose later. That's why.
Oh, it was an 8D chess plan.
Correct.
No points to either, because it was defined too broadly, but Jay did accept that. And there's no way he accepted it so he could tear, like, no, like, yeah, I don't believe him. I think he just then realized it had holes as he was going on and then started poking into those holes. And now he's like, well, that's why I accepted what you're saying. But like, no, he would have had a problem at the beginning if he rejected her definition. So you can't agree to a definition and change it. I mean, you can, if this was a good faith discussion, you could say, you know what, I actually, even though I accepted your definition, I actually think it has these problems. I would like you to redefine it because I think under its current things, we both agree it's too broad. And then maybe Erudite would be like, oh, okay, I kind of agree. And now I'm going to nuance and refine it. And guess what? That's called fucking progress, because now we're moving the discussion along instead of just doing whatever this is, okay? So again, no points to either of them in this segment, okay? They're both close to getting disqualified, I'll tell you that much.
Who won the debate is judged by the audience.
Yeah, but the audience isn't just chatters, right? It's also viewers, and these are not the same person.
I bet the comments are going to say otherwise.
I'm sure the comments on a very right-leaning, decently Eastern Orthodox that has already accepted most of your presuppositions as a show are going to agree with you.
What?
Right-leaning.
Right-leaning?
Yeah. I'm sure that they're going to agree with you, but that doesn't mean that you've won, right? Just like if I put this on my channel and then all of my left-leaning audiences said I won, that's not evidence that I won, obviously.
Are you sure?
Yeah, obviously. That would be like a super selection bias.
Debates are for audiences.
Sure. Did you listen to anything I just said? What's a selection bias?
Well, it's when you choose the evidence based on what you want.
That's not a selection bias.
Yeah, that's not a selection bias. What is happening? What is happening with this man who apparently has a philosophy degree? Okay, at least he like corrects course once it's called out. But yes, and you can actually see this in real time. If you look at this podcast debate now, it is flooded with mostly pro-erudite people, but that's after Destiny made a react video to it, so it's probably more flooded with people that are more like Destiny/erudite fans, whereas in the live audience, if you look at the live chats coming in, everybody's on Jay's side. And so it's an interesting situation. It's like you get both audiences colliding, and it seems like you have the two selection biases of both audiences, and now they're into one. And so looking through the comments is wild, because it shifts depending on when you look at it, which kind of like shows what erudite is saying, which is definitely true. The Whatever podcast is more predisposed, as am I. Usually when there's these debates, I'm almost always on the left side, right? It's known that the right side of the Whatever podcast is usually the bad side to be on, right? But then, and so I think everyone's prepared to be on that side. But I think even the Whatever podcast is realizing that with this one, that Jay just did not meet expectations. And again, let me know if I'm wrong, if you're a fan of the Whatever podcast, because from my point of view, this feels atypical in that the right side is absolutely kicking the crap out of the left side, okay? At least from my point of view.
Do you remember what the word is for when you selectively you cherry pick your evidence? What's the word for that?
Well, there's two fallacies. There's the sharpshooter fallacy and the gambler's fallacy. So you might be referring to either of those.
No.
Just cherry picking fallacy?
It's not cherry picking fallacy. It's got
She
like
doesn't
a really
even know the
common
fallacies.
I do.
No, you don't.
Yes.
So
But it's crazy.
What's the gambler's fallacy, if you know the fallacy?
What's a false analogy?
What's the gambler's fallacy?
Does he know the gambler fallacy? Because the gambler fallacy is about probabilities of the past affecting probabilities in the future. I can't imagine how he's tying that into this debate. So I wonder if he is thinking, and the gambler fallacy is something else. But without him saying, I'm not gonna deduct a point. Although I'm tempted to, because it's such an irrelevant fallacy that unless it's just like a pop quiz, it's just like, hey, what does this fallacy mean? Otherwise, I cannot think of a world in how the probability of past events not having the bearing on future probability events at all ties in to anything they're talking about at all. Okay, but I'll give him a benefit of the doubt. Maybe it's just a weird pop quiz for some reason to test her philosophical prowess. Okay,
we should give $100 to whichever chatter can figure out why Jay doesn't understand what a false analogy is and was incorrect in the use of it.
I know what a false analogy is.
That's true, but then why do you use it incorrectly?
I didn't.
You did. So either you're lying right now or using bad faith.
Comparing the nation state of Israel to the history of feminism is a false analogy.
What was I comparing?
You asked for a definition that was not connected to history. And then, by the way, you said that history is bound up with a definition.
So I asked you if you could define Israel. If you could define
Israel
said, can
without
I do
going
it without going through the history? And you said, yeah, I could.
No, I didn't.
Yes,
I
you said that you could define Israel without
No, I didn't. I said I have to.
History.
Now
and
you're
then the
lying.
reason why you said that it's disanalogous is you said Israel has too long of a history.
No, you just yapped and didn't listen.
Okay, point to Jay, and it's weird because Jay doesn't deserve the point, but because he originally was saying that you could not define the nation state of Israel. I mean, it's in this video that you just saw the clip like half an hour ago. He did say you can't define it, and then he switched and said it's disanalogous. But Erudite seems to forget that, and so yeah. So unfortunately, Jay gets the point on this one. I hate to say it because he doesn't deserve it in this case. But Erudite's wrong. My hands are tied.
No, I said that when you were when I asked you to define Israel, I asked if you could define Israel without going through these centuries of history, and you said that you could.
No,
and then
I said
asked
no.
why.
I did not.
You said that you could.
You're lying. I said I didn't.
The reason why it was a false analogy is because you
You're
said
losing
that the
your mind.
extent was
You're
different.
crazy. You can't hold your
This is
claim.
crazy. This is crazy.
I said you can't because in the same case as feminism, you can't.
You know what? If you want to retroactively change your claim and correct it, fair enough.
I think maybe you misheard.
No.
Because it wouldn't work for my
Jay.
argument if I said
agree.
the opposite.
That's why it was stupid of you to say.
I didn't say that.
Yes,
I
you
said
did.
that neither feminism nor Israel could be defined apart from their history.
Yeah, okay, now I don't feel bad about giving him the point because she is like tripling down, and yes, he clearly said that you couldn't define either, which, to be fair, I think is stupid because then he changed it and said it's disanalogous, but then it's not disanalogous, so I don't know. He still gets to keep his point because Erudite she's misremembering, and yes, he said that you couldn't define, and that's why she was mad. She was mad that because she's like, how would you define anything then? Because to define any concept or anything, you'd have to go through the whole history of building up to it. Obviously, that's not true. You can define existentialism without looking at every single existential writer and all the history leading up to it and what caused people to be existentialist. Obviously, that's just on its face true, okay? It's just on its face true, okay? Everyone just has to deal with that.
Earlier on in the discussion, you said that feminism is unavoidable. I think during your opening introduction.
Unavoidable and necessary, yeah.
Do you want to get into that a little bit? Like why is it unavoidable?
I think because as nations grow, eventually you will want women to join the workforce to be able to compete at like a global scale. And therefore it becomes inevitable because you need women to join the workforce. And as soon as women join the workforce, they now have way more leveraging power by having money and certain rights. And once they have those rights and those leverage powers, they're necessarily going to leverage that power to give themselves more freedoms that they obviously wanted.
Point for Erudite. Obviously, I think that is just on its face true. And I feel like that's a hard... I don't know what Andrew Wilson would say to that because I feel like he's definitely like a better debater than Jay. But it does seem to me inevitable that yes, like back before we have like modern society, obviously you're going to have situations, and we see this in the developing world now, where you want to like pump out so many kids, right? Because, that was what everything was based on, right? In agrarian society, you want more children. You want like 8 children or more, right? And obviously we've seen the secular trend where the more modern stuff gets, the less kids people have. Now that can go to a destructive place. Obviously we're like below replacement, and like all Western countries are. And so so there's like a correction, a hypercorrection that's happened where we need to like balance out more, right? And get a birth rate that's probably like 3 kids, but we don't need a birth rate that's like 8 kids. And so women weren't in the workforce largely because they're having larger families, and there's like less jobs of which women would be capable of doing well, right? In an agrarian society, obviously most of the jobs are going to be done best by the men. And so the society kind of dictates what genders are going to do what. But now when we don't need to have a monstrous birth rate, although again, it needs to be higher, but it doesn't need to be 8. When we don't need that, then obviously women are going to have less of a role throughout their entirety of their lives, right? Even if a woman has 3 kids, well, those 3 kids are probably going to be in school and stuff at a certain age. And we have, obviously, education is more common now. Like all these things do seem inevitable because you're going to have women with a bunch of time on their hands. Obviously, they're going to enter the workforce. And so those aspects of feminism are going to be necessary. You're going to end up having women in the workforce eventually because there's more jobs that women are capable of doing, because there's less of a biological, physical barrier to those jobs as advancing technology happens. And so those women are going to want to enter the workforce. They have the time to enter the workforce, and the country will do better when they do. And then, yes, they're going to want voting rights if they're working in a workforce, right? And then stuff's going to start to cascade out. And yes, I do think there's a degree where feminism became bad, and it also was bad at the start in certain ways, depending on which founders you look at. But it's like, to a degree, there is an inevitability of it, right? I think that's so hard to deny. And if you have an argument against it watching, I would love to hear it, because I don't see. You could say it's maybe a bad thing, but to me, it's similar to saying like the nuclear bombs are inevitable. Someone is going to discover that technology, right? Like that's just always going to happen in any society that I can conceive of in the universe that gets sufficiently developed. You're going to discover nuclear energy, and then it's a choice of like what you do with that. And maybe you could say nuclear energy is still bad, but to say it's inevitable is a different thing, right? You could be saying that it's bad that we ever made a nuclear bomb while also saying it's inevitable that we would eventually make one, right? Like those two things seem different to me. And I think you make a similar argument with AI. Maybe AI ends up killing us all, and maybe it'll be bad, but it's hard to say that it's not inevitable, given the fact that what we know of computers, and that you can have a Turing complete set of boxes with marbles, right? You can, like, the idea of a computer is so fundamental to our universe, right? That you could in theory build one. So it's hard to imagine a society that could develop long enough and then not come up with computers, and if they come up with computers, not come up with AI eventually, right? So the inevitability of something is not tied to the moral worth of something. And so that seems to be the strongest point of Erudite's argument, is that it will just happen in a society, that feminism just will come into existence, because eventually you're going to have enough technology, you're not going to need the high birth rate, and you're going to want women to work and boost the global production of the company and of the country and be better economically and all this stuff, right? Like I can't think of a counterexample. So again, let me know.
What are you asking right now?
If it didn't exist for thousands of years in history, then it wasn't necessary.
I'm pretty sure you literally said that multiple countries fell because of like liberalization.
Okay, yeah, point to Erudite, because at least, I mean, it's hard because it's like she's not saying this stuff, I'm saying this stuff, and obviously I'm not there to debate with Jay, but the reason it wasn't there for thousands of years of history is just because you had to have a higher birth rate. All the stuff I just said, there was less technology. You could use the same argument with, again, the nuclear bomb and AI. Yes, those didn't exist for thousands of years on Earth. They didn't exist for millions of years, so I guess they weren't inevitable. No, they are inevitable. They just take a certain degree of sophistication and technological advancement to get there. And I think we've clearly reached that point with feminism, where it's like, yeah, you get to a certain point as a society and things will probably just end up going in that direction, right? Like but again, that doesn't comment on whether it's good or bad, but it's a weird thing to like point out that like, well, we did this for so long. It would be the same thing with birth rate. It'd be like, well, we used to have like 8 kids all the time. And that worked. And so why doesn't it work now? It's like, you could use the same argument to say, why don't we just stay as an agrarian society? It's like, yeah, it worked for a long time. And before that, it worked to be hunter-gatherers for a long time. And we're not hunter-gatherers anymore. And we're not agriculturalists either, because there's a progression to society. So just because something has worked for so long doesn't mean that, oh, therefore this new thing is like, it's not inevitable anymore. That's just the arrow of history, my dude.
The reality is that China wants to win over America, which means they're going to allow women into the workforce. They're going to give them tampons. They're going to give them birth control. You have to.
None of that proves that it's necessary and inevitable.
It proves that it's necessary and inevitable because the technology changes at a global level, and for you to compete at a global level, you have to allow women into the workplace.
So she just yaps. This is like her whole thing is to just yap. If it didn't happen in Rome, then it wasn't necessary and inevitable, and that proves my point.
Do we live in Rome anymore?
Yeah, on a point to Erudite. This is such a weird thing to disagree on. If it didn't happen in this one society that was, didn't have the technology that we had, the only way I could like see this is if he's just talking about just some hypothetical thing where like all countries just stopped advancing technologically, and that would counter my AI and my nuclear bomb thing too. It's like, well, yeah, maybe societies just would for some reason all decide to stop advancing technologically, and then we'd never get nuclear energy, and then we'd never get artificial intelligence. But it's like that is such like a hard hypothetical to conceive of, right? Like, so if he just means technically inevitable, that we could imagine a theoretical society, and not just one society, a theoretical world of societies that all together decided to stop at this exact point of technological advancement, then I would say, sure, I guess he's technically right. But like, is that how you want to be right? Is just on some like hypothetical that would never happen because we just know how human nature works and we know how technological progress works, and you obviously can't snapshot the Roman Empire and say that the Roman Empire could have stayed the same forever, because in order for that to happen, every other empire would have to stay the exact same, because if the Roman Empire stayed the same with all of its current technology and then the other empires around it progressed, then yeah, the Roman Empire would get stomped and wouldn't exist. So it would have to be like everybody making an agreement all at once. And that, I mean, similar to AI, it would be the same analogy where, yes, if we all got together as a whole Earth, we could have some like global agreement, and maybe if everyone followed it, then maybe we could like stop the progress of AI. Maybe we could all agree to do it all together, but that's not what's happening. And then we see countries in Europe that are trying to stop it, and they're going to get left behind, and they're going to get stomped. And that's the reality of it. Unless everybody agrees to stop, which why would they? Then it's not going to happen, and it's going to keep going. So I don't know. It's a weird thing to like set your flag on and be like, yes, it's not inevitable, when in my opinion it clearly is. But I'm yapping too much. Back to the video.
Oh my gosh, are you serious? You're that stupid.
Do we live in Rome anymore, or the technology?
You said necessary and inevitable?
Yes.
Was it necessary and inevitable in Rome?
Again, do we live in Rome? Did we live in Rome?
So that it wasn't necessarily inevitable.
Are the technologies
Can you
the
follow
same?
an argument?
I'm sorry for cutting in again. I just want to point out inevitable doesn't mean that it's going to happen in that time frame. Inevitable is literally a temporal word. It means it will eventually happen. It is inevitable that it will happen. So yes, it didn't happen in Rome because Rome was at a specific point in human history and isn't the projected into the future. So yes, you could say this with any modern technology. You could say that domesticating animals wasn't inevitable, but given enough intelligence in humans and enough humans trying to innovate, then domestication of animals is inevitable. In the same way, you can't just point to a prehistoric society that didn't domesticate animals and be like, well, I guess it's not inevitable. Inevitable is a time word, which means you're not going to see it at every slice of time you look at. Holy jeez.
So if we have like a bell curve, right, of men and women, and men tend to be a little bit more extreme, and say we're selecting for a job that's purely
So you're
about...
repeating the first 20 minutes of this discussion and ignoring what I just asked you.
If you want me to respond to you, I can. If you want to just like bloviate,
but
sigh,
you're
and
not
be angry,
responding.
we can do
You're just
I'm trying to give you a response.
20 minutes.
I'm trying to give you a response.
It's not a response.
Okay,
it's
I can just sit here and you can be like,
it's like a machine.
Fallacy. Or do you want me to respond?
You can try.
Okay. You sure? You're the leader here.
Try.
Okay. So at an individual level, right? I don't want a system that would limit any single individual from achieving higher levels than they can otherwise achieve. What? Why are you mad?
It's just like talking to like a child. It's just...
Okay, what word are you mad about? I know words are very sensitive for you.
What justifies the position that you're arguing for, that patriarchy should not be the norm, but feminism...
I've never said that.
Oh my God.
I've literally never said patriarchy should be the norm.
They're mutually exclusive
They're not
positions.
mutually exclusive.
Yes, they are.
They're not.
Feminism is a revolutionary
We live in a
movement.
patriarchy and feminism exists.
That doesn't mean that they're not mutually exclusive.
Yes,
that's
it does.
a stupid argument. No, it's not. That's an appeal to that's a naturalist fallacy. The fact that it is so, then it must be good or it must be right.
I'm not saying that it's good or right. I'm saying that they both exist.
The fact that they exist doesn't mean that the positions are coherent.
How are they mutually exclusive?
They can be ideological or epistemically incoherent, even if they exist at the same time. You don't know that?
Okay. So how are they mutually exclusive, Jay?
Because they're contrary positions. Patriarchy is an anti-feminist position. That's what I'm arguing.
I would not agree with that by and large. Do you think patriarchy just means that it wants to oppress and crush women?
You admitted that feminism is a historical movement. All of its proponents are revolutionaries who wanted an egalitarian society and did not want a patriarchy. They're mutually exclusive. So you've redefined the position to be your own feminism that's not relevant to what we're debating.
I don't have to argue for those women. I don't think that they're mutually exclusive.
But your position is stupid then, because it's an ambiguous position that's just anything that you subjectively think helps women.
This is exasperating. Because, like, yes, if we're looking at founders, then I agree that that is like counter to a patriarchy, right? And so in that sense, feminism and a patriarchy don't exist. But yet, look at our society. Obviously, feminism has made big grounds. Women are in the workforce. Women are voting, right? Women have the rights that men have. There's a lot of stuff in our society that feminism has won on, right? And so, but we still live in a patriarchy, right? Like, I don't know if anyone would deny that. So then obviously they somehow are coexisting at the same time. Right? Like, and especially if feminism is just the empowerment of women, obviously that could exist and still be inside of a patriarchy. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive ideologically. I don't know why Jay would think that they have to be, unless he's just looking at the founders. So no points awarded for this, but I just wanted to say that because I think they're talking about it from a bit of a different angle each.
What is the argument that feminism is right for society?
It is beneficial to society because it improves innovator skill. It allows more people to enter the workforce. Again. GDP is one of the things.
And why are we supposed to think that's the good?
Because I think it is morally good to allow
you think that. No, why is that the good?
Because I believe that it is good.
So it's you subjectively saying because it's the good.
No, I'm a divine command theorist.
But when we went to God, God didn't ever give us a feminist society.
Yeah, but I don't.
By your own admission.
Actually, I think by my definition of feminism, we both agreed that ancient Christianity was feminist.
No,
and then
that's
we're like,
moving the goalpost.
Never mind. Feminism is not that thing anymore.
That's moving the goalpost.
It's not moving the goalpost.
It's not moving the goalpost. So another point to Erudite, because again, if he disagreed with that definition, he should have said that. If he's going to concede to the definition, and yes, under that definition, then you would say that there is feminism in the Old Testament, right? Not in the same way that there is now, but it was empowering women compared to the other cultures, which was her definition. And again, if you don't like her definition, that's fine, but that's the one that was agreed to, okay? When you both agree to a definition, you have to use that or you have to choose to revise it, okay? I don't know what else to say.
I'm a divine command theorist. I believe that God is fundamentally relative in how he approaches things, and I do my best to use exegesis, eisegesis, and divine revelation to understand what God's will is and to enact that in my life and understand
pure
others.
Gibberish.
Another point to Erudite. How is that gibberish? That's a proper like Christian outlook on meta-ethics, right? That's what she said is a totally fine Christian meta-ethical framework, okay? I don't know if he just doesn't know the words she used and it would just always like wah, 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 wah when he heard it, but it's like that was a proper, there was nothing wrong with what she said, okay? I don't know if he's just trying to attack everything. It just assumes everything she says is idiotic, and maybe the whatever fan base does that as a whole, where they know she's arguing on behalf of feminism, so they just like kind of shut off their brains. I don't know. I hope not, but like for some of the chatters, obviously that seems to be the case, and for Jay, it definitely seems to be the case. So yeah, Erudite gets that point.
What's the argument for feminism other than GDP? And it's just good and it's liberal? Okay. So do you understand that I can then come to the debate and say that it's good because it's not liberal?
Okay, and then I would say, why do you not value liberalism?
You're missing the point, because
why do you not value liberalism?
That's not an argument.
I think liberalism leads to higher levels of flourishing based on every single statistical norm that we have that exists out there. That's what I value. I think that when people are doing better,
that you value
people are happier, healthier, fuller, better mentally
the fact
well,
that you value
that
doesn't make it an argument. That's the point.
I
That's
believe
your problem.
that God wants us to be happy, healthy,
just appealing to that doesn't do anything for your case.
See, and now we're getting into the presuppositional weeds, and I feel like I see people retreat to this when they don't know what else to say in an argument, whether it's like, well, how do you justify any of your stuff? And it's like, it's fine to go into epistemology, but it seems oftentimes it's a cop-out. Oftentimes, especially when both of them have a divine command theory of ethics, and then would also see like reality as founded on God as well. Like they both are starting from the same place. So like this works if it's like, if Erudite was like an atheist, then it's like, okay, well, how do you justify any morals? How do you decide what's good at all? Like that would make sense, but she's a divine command theorist. So it's like that line of suppositional apologetics just doesn't make sense to do to someone else who is also like a suppositional apologeticist. Like, do you know what I mean? The criticism doesn't work if the person has God as their foundation for both reality, how we know things, and our morals. So I don't know what's going on there. So another point to Erudite.
I think that liberal societies produce all of those outcomes to the highest level. That doesn't mean that I think that God is a liberal by any means. God is so much more and beyond all of that. But I think by and large, the liberal system
if he promotes
leads to the greatest
then he would
possible
be a
outcomes.
liberal.
God is so much bigger than any label or construct that any human can apply to him. I don't even know why you're saying that.
Because it's a dumb argument. What
You're right. It would be a dumb argument for me to apply any political
argument.
fucking label to the omnipotent
You
God.
just said that liberal societies are good. That's what you appeal to in terms of divine command theory. So that would make God illiberal.
No, it wouldn't. At all.
That's another point for Erudite. Obviously, there could be systems that we're like, we have these biblical ideas and we have these Christian norms of what it means and what we think God wants for us, and then we have the system that we think best encapsulates that. I mean, I would use that same argument with like capitalism. I would say that God wants us to be flourishing as a species, and capitalism is the best way to do it. Would I then say God is a capitalist? That's retarded. That doesn't make any sense, right? But I would still like support the system, and why I would support it if I was pushed by someone like Jay, I would go back to Christian principles on why I think that capitalism is going to best cause society to move in a direction that will best exemplify those Christian principles. But yeah, to say that like God is a capitalist would just be like a brain dead thing to say, and that applies to almost every like ideology that I would support that's not like literally like Christianity. Like any belief system beyond that, or any like political system beyond that, right? Like even if we take this into the field of politics, right? Like I think that the Republicans do a better job than the Democrats. But would I say that God is a Republican? That's such a crazy thing to say, right? From a theological point of view, that makes no sense. Obviously, God is like far beyond political labels. That's just on its face, just like self-evident when we're talking about something as broad as God. Like already to like say almost anything about God is to tell a lie, because God is like so transcendent of all of these labels. But especially when it comes to like these man-made labels, like it's one thing to say like God is love and God is joy and God is peace, and like there's these certain things that it's like, okay, those are like immutable characteristics of God. But to take a man-made label like a Republican or a feminist or a capitalist or any of these things, like that just it doesn't make sense. So of course God is not a liberal, and he wouldn't have to. That doesn't make it. It's nonsense. It's utter nonsense. So yes, the point goes to Erudite, okay? And you must know, if you're watching, that I'm right about that. You just have to know. I don't care how much you hate Erudite. I don't care how much you love Jay. You know what I'm saying is right in your heart of hearts.
My argument is supplied by the evidences. It is good for society. That's my argument.
And I said, what's the good? That relies on the good, which is what?
Flourishing, happiness, well-being.
And God's a
Some
liberal.
like sovereignty and safety.
God's a liberal because he wants a liberal society.
I never said God is a liberal. I said, of course, God is so much more than anything we could ever apply a construct to, because I'm not a heretic. Are you crazy? I would never apply any political label. You don't see the divorce
between those two
I would
positions.
never apply. I'm sorry.
It's like talking to a wall.
God is sacred to me. I would never apply a label to God ever about anything.
So he wants a liberal society, but he's not a liberal.
Even my own.
So he wants a liberal society, but he's not a liberal.
He wants so much more.
That's a partial fallacy, you idiot.
That's not a fallacy. That's not a fallacy. Obviously, God wants a lot more. That's why I wouldn't say God's a capitalist or a Republican or any of these things, right? That we live in a fallen world and we pick the best approximation to try to get to the world that we think God wants. That's not a fallacy. That doesn't mean that we can like look at any individual movement and be like, oh, God definitely would love this movement. I mean, that's the type of tribalism that would just be like insanely destructive, right? Like to just, I mean, every political party would claim that, right? Like we have to move beyond that. That's like such a primitive way of seeing the world. It's untenable. It's just untenable.
Do you think that God is any political system? What political system do you think God wants?
Yeah, I think God wants a patriarchy.
Patriarchy isn't a political system. It's a hierarchical society.
It relates to a political system.
That doesn't matter. There's patriarchies in democracies.
I said
there's patriarchies
a monarchy
in monarchies.
in the Old Testament.
So God
Israel
wants
was
a monarchy?
Yeah, he was
God
a patriarchal deity.
Oh.
Has Christianity had anything but monarchies for the last 2,000 years?
So you're comfortable capturing the entire visage of God in a single political system. You're comfortable with that?
Did I say his visage is encaptioned?
You said that God wants a monarchy, so God's a monarchist?
Correct.
Wow, that's crazy.
Patriarchalism.
I'm not heretical like that. I don't know what to tell you.
Heretical.
Yes, I would never apply a human label
You have no idea
to
what
God.
heresy even is.
Another point to erudite. Okay, I think that is, that's just insane. I was wondering if he was going to say that before when he was talking about how that was what we saw in the Bible, it's what we should have now. But then does he apply that to everything? I guess he does apply it to monarchy, which is just crazy. I don't even know what to really say to that. I've never heard somebody make that claim before, that what God ultimately wants is a monarchy. I mean, they lived in a theocracy. But it's like, how would we do a theocracy now, right? Like the Old Testament, obviously we have, I don't want to get like too dispensational on y'all, but like obviously there's different dispensations throughout history of how God has interacted according to like Christianity, right? I mean, God obviously doesn't speak in the same way. No new prophecies are given that are like written down in scripture today, right? It would be heretical to say that, in fact, right? And he's Eastern Orthodox, and that's not something, the canon is closed now, right? And so the way God spoke and appointed kings does not happen now. And so the monarchy was a theocratic monarchy because God was like specifically handpicking the people that he wanted to be king. And so I don't even know how to engage with that. I don't know how that would possibly translate to the modern era where that is not happening anymore, right? Like, unless he wants the Eastern Orthodox in the same way that they like can select, their religious leaders, that they want it to be like the Orthodox Church prays and selects monarchies. I'd have to really think to see if there's any feasible way that anyone could justify that in the modern era as a Christian, because it's such a strange foreign concept. But again, I think he might just be heated. I don't know if he actually holds to that, because again, I don't know who this guy is besides this debate. And so I don't know. I don't know if this is just something he's just going with and he's just trolling, or if this is something he sincerely thinks. Not sure.
This is how stupid you are.
Do you know
have no clue what you're talking about.
So
you're a total suit.
How did Paul engage with the Bible?
Did you think that because you knew destiny and just yapping really fast that you would be a good debater? How could Paul be a postmodernist?
Do you want me to answer?
Was Paul talking to Derrida? Was he talking to Derrida?
Remember how
was Paul talking to Derrida?
Just because they weren't invented yet
doesn't
mean that you can't apply them to history.
You have no idea what you're talking about. Now you're making my argument. Thank you for admitting my argument. Thank you for admitting my argument 2 hours ago.
No.
Good job. You just lost again.
Wow. This is crazy. I won. He just made weird noises. What's Agrippa's trilemma? You don't know. You're avoiding this because you have no idea.
Just to clarify, I think I wish he could just say that he doesn't know, because it's known usually, at least to me, by Munchausen trilemma, which is that every argument arguably is either circular and that it's going to reinforce itself, or it's going to be regressive and that you could use an infinite, you could ask for the proof of the proof and the proof of that proof and the proof of that proof and go all the way down, or you're just asserting it without anything. And so the trilemma is that has to be one of those three options. I don't know if it's commonly called Agrippa's trilemma, but he might just know it under a different name. But why doesn't he just ask what it is? But everyone, there's so much ego going on in this discussion at this point that it's just nothing's getting solved or nothing's getting discovered.
It's epistemic holism. I said that like 10 times earlier, which you didn't hear, it didn't register with you. So I'm not subject to a position that's a foundationalist critique, okay? I'm not an epistemic foundationalist, so that doesn't apply to me. I don't have that system.
Wow, you've solved Agrippa's trilemma?
Yes, because I'm not in that system.
That's crazy. That's not possible. Just so everyone's aware, that is impossible.
Tell me what a presuppositional argument is, since you're saying that this is my position. What is it?
A presuppositional argument is where you have like a presupposing of God. Like God is a presuppositional argument. Mm-hmm. There's some foundational initial cause, and everything kind of comes from there.
No, that's the cosmological argument. That's not the presuppositional argument.
Okay, why don't you tell me what it is?
That is no. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. That is not the cosmological argument. The cosmological argument is saying that God must exist because every cause has a cause and it has to come back to one uncaused cause. I'm not putting it into proper premises, but you guys know what I'm talking about. Look it up if you don't. What does that have to do with what he's talking about? So, but again, a degree in philosophy and debating for 25 years. I don't have a degree in philosophy. Okay, I have like a passive interest in philosophy, but like these things are, he's made so many like weird elementary philosophical mistakes that it's really confusing me. And so a point to erudite again, unfortunately. Or, well, actually, no, let's take away a point from Jay, because she didn't know that the cosmological argument was something else, but I knew, and so I'm taking away his point, okay? Deal with it.
The issue is that my positions are coherent as well. I think about them.
Not.
Yes, they are.
They're just coherent in your head because they're self-referencing to your health.
You just don't like them.
You literally grounded it in your own subjective
That's not an argument. Why aren't you making an argument?
What?
What do you mean? You're not making an argument.
You appealed to yourself.
What do you mean? That's not true. I'm a divine command theorist. Were you not listening?
You saying that is not an argument. Your
That's
argument
not an argument either.
That's a tu quoque.
What's your position?
That's a tu quoque.
That's not a tu quoque.
How is it not?
Because a tu quoque is an ad hom based on hypocrisy. I didn't accuse you of hypocrisy.
You said that's your position. You just literally just did that.
She knew that. Oh no, you used the fallacy wrong again.
You literally just said that to me.
I'm realizing that to debate Jay, I just have to memorize every single fallacy because I think you used them all
I'm pretty
incorrectly.
sure debates
you
relate
used false
to
analogy incorrectly. You
no,
used
I didn't.
tu quoque
no,
incorrectly.
you made the false analogy,
No.
you idiot.
No.
Yeah, okay, that has to be a point to Erudite. He's bringing up so many logical fallacies, but a shocking amount of them are applied incorrectly, which I already think it's like brain dead to most of the time bring up and call out the logical fallacy. There are some times where it's like, this is helpful to categorize this thing, but like if you're the kind of debate guy who's sitting there and be like, well, that's actually an ad hominem, and this is actually an infinite regress fallacy, and blah, blah, blah. Like it gets really annoying, right? And it doesn't really like move the conversation forward if you're just like shouting out, fallacies all the time. It's like, at least explain why something's wrong, because otherwise it just seems like you're trying to score points, which this is my critique of some of the left side of the whatever debates, is a lot of them are just trying to win an argument and trying to score points. And I mean, maybe they'd even agree with that because they're saying it's for the audience, and the audience just wants to see, this liberal person destroyed, which it's like, yeah, that's fun. But like, at the same time, don't we want to like get to truth, or don't we want to have a good discussion and a good debate and a good back and forth and actually like move the conversation along a little bit? Like, does everything have to just be about like scoring points? And I know it's ironic because I'm literally scoring the points. So like, forget about that part, like it's, when I do it, it's different. Okay. Well, I'm trying to figure out who won in a totally different way. Okay. Fuck you guys.
The key to debating Jay is memorizing lists of fallacies.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that the laws of thought, matter in a debate. I'm pretty sure.
You knew
I'm pretty
that
sure the laws of thought matter in a debate.
Were you misciting tu quoque intentionally?
I didn't cite it wrong.
Yes, you did.
I cited it correctly.
No.
You literally just turned it back and said, well, you do this.
That's not a tu quoque.
Yes, it is.
No, it's
yes,
not.
It is.
I wasn't accusing you of hypocrisy.
Yes, you did.
No,
I
didn't.
You said that I was making the same argument.
That's not a tu quoque.
Yes, it is. You're calling me hypocritical.
That's not hypocrisy. I'm not accusing you of hypocrisy. Hypocrisy would be if you say one thing and then do a different thing. Like if you're like, don't smoke, and I'm like, but you're smoking, Jay. That would be a tu quoque. Don't smoke is a completely valid argument, regardless of whether you smoke or not.
What you're yapping about.
Yeah, and again, yes, she's right. Point to Erudite. It's not a tu quoque fallacy. That's just saying that you're doing the same type of argumentation is not a tu quoque fallacy. A tu quoque fallacy is a subset of ad hominem attacks where you're trying to call out hypocrisy of what the person's doing, and that is not what she is doing. And so it's like he's like half right about a lot of these fallacies. Sometimes he's just fully wrong, but other times he's just half right or applying them incorrectly. And again, I don't know if it's just that he's getting heated, and maybe this is all performance debate, and I'm taking the bait and falling for the troll by trying to like analyze it, like maybe, I don't know, because if this is like an Alex Stein or something, then I would be feeling like, okay, I can't really engage in this fully, or even like a Fuentes. It's like, okay, I can't, there's a degree where this is like all performative. With this guy, maybe it is too, and I'm just not picking up on it, in which case then I'm the fool. But if this is meant to be like a serious debater, then it's just like, I got some problems, and the score is an indication of that currently.
By and large, God doesn't want us to like be punished arbitrarily for no reason. So I think he more or less wants a society that allows us to express in the way that we want to.
Which is a liberal society?
There's probably multiple societies that would allow this in the future, not just a liberal one.
Does he want a liberal one right now?
I don't know.
But earlier you argued that it was God.
I hope so. Yeah, I hope so. I believe so.
But now you don't know. You said God earlier, divine command theory. Now you don't know. So which one is it?
Well, it's both, right? Because I'm
it's
not. It's
both. I don't know and divine.
Yeah,
divine command
I'm
theory?
not like when it comes to my faith. I try to.
Those are contradictions.
Do you want me to answer?
Were you contradicted?
Well, to some degree, yeah. I think there's a paradox.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, there's a
so
paradox. There's a paradox of faith that you have to hold, where you're simultaneously.
A paradox is not a contradiction. They're two different things.
That's true.
Did you know that?
That's true. It's almost like I'm doing a paradox.
So now you're appealing to a paradox to get out of a contradiction?
Do you want me to answer you? Okay, I'll. Do you want me to answer you?
Please contradict away.
Okay, so I think when it comes to things like my faith, I try to engage in some level of epistemic humility, where I both do my best to understand what God wants through divine command theory, through exegesis, eisegesis, and divine revelation. However, at the same time, I maintain a level of epistemic humility of recognizing that I could be wrong about the infinite God, which is why I said, I don't know, but I hope so.
Yeah, that's again. I hate to give more points to Erudite. Maybe that shows my bias. But like I said, if anything, I'm biased against Erudite. But she gets the point, because I think that yes, obviously you have to have some epistemic humility when approaching these issues. Again, using the capitalist analogy, I think that's the best system. I could be wrong about that, because yeah, it's not in the Bible to do capitalism. But when I look at the economic systems and I look at flourishing, I'm using what I think God wants from biblical texts and from Christian societies, and thinking, okay, and from logic, and thinking that, okay, God wants human flourishing, and I think capitalism is the best system right now to do that. But it's like, would I say that God is a capitalist? Definitely not. Would I say God for sure wants capitalism? I would be like, well, I think so, because like I think socialism is just like a worse system, and so I think capitalism is like has raised all tides, and has done better for the world, right? But like I could be wrong about that, and I'm less confident in that than I am in the claim that God wants like humans to flourish, right? I'm very confident in that, right? Because I could tie that to the Bible, I could tie that to more logical aspects of Christianity, but like the specific ways to get there, it's like obviously you're going to be less confident, because it's like unless you're given a specific thing about an economic system, you're going to be less confident about that. Obviously this could apply to all these things. So it's so weird that Jay wants her to commit to these specific things, that God definitely wants liberalism. It's like, well, she thinks that from her point of view, she thinks that's what God wants, and that's a fair thing to think based on how she's defining liberalism, right? And it depends what she means. I'm not entirely sure, right? Like I'm fine with like the classical liberal stuff, right? Like Jordan Peterson calls himself a classical liberalist, and yeah, I would agree with those values. And so it's like, but would I say that God wants society to be classically liberal? I'm not confident enough to say that. Should I have to be confident enough to say that? That seems like an insane ask. Obviously, we have degrees of confidence as we go from basic principles into inaction, right? We know that God is loving and he wants us to love, but then when we get to the question of what does that love look like, right, we're going to be less confident on specific issues of how we adjudicate that love and how we give out that love, and what is the proper expression of that love, and what does it mean to be kind, and who should we be kind to, and what circumstances, all of that stuff I'm going to be less confident on than the stuff at the beginning, just that God is love and I should be loving, right? Like there's a degree to be fully confident about all, that whole spectrum is insane to me. You have to have different degrees of confidence as you move away from foundational principles into applied ethics. Obviously, your normative ethics are going to be more set in stone and have a higher confidence value than your applied ethics, especially when you get into like niche areas, and especially when you get into stuff like liberalism or republicanism or the libertarianism or capitalism or any of these systems, right? You just have to be, if you're honest and if you're trying to approach truth, you just have to be more humble in those areas than in the foundations. Okay, I think that just has to be the case.
So another way to show that she lost the debate is that her position is unfalsifiable, because anytime it gets challenged, she can redefine the terms to be whatever it needs to be at that moment. And if you go back and watch the debate, she did that multiple times.
I've used
and
the
that's
exact
why feminism,
same definition.
But the definition was broad enough to fit this.
It wasn't actually broad enough.
It is
and
broad.
Again, if you didn't like it,
you thought ancient
if you didn't
Israelites
like it, Jay, you shouldn't
thought
agree
ancient
to it.
Israelites were feminist.
Yeah, to some degree.
Feminism is a historical movement, you goober.
Again, just
a
because
modern movement.
Do you think that trans people only existed after we made up the word trans?
The feminist movement is what's being debated.
It's literally not. It's feminism.
No, I'm pretty sure the title
it's a concept.
is feminism, right?
It's a concept. It's not. Is the feminist movement
the feminist
good?
movement is what I'm debating.
That's not what I came here to debate. The question is feminism good?
I think we're finally gotten to the crux. They are acknowledging that they're debating completely separate things, which is why Erudite is saying that in an arguable sense, the Old Testament is feministic in that it empowered women compared to the surrounding cultures, and why Jay rejects that because he's seeing it as a movement. I don't know what the debate prompt was. I think it was just feminism, and in which case it doesn't have to just start in the end of the 19th century. Like, I don't think that makes sense. Obviously, you have precursors to movements, and you have precursors to all this stuff. And if Erudite's just talking about the word and the concept, obviously, yeah, that predates the movement, in the same sense that you can find existential thought in Ecclesiastes, right? I mean, I don't think Jay would deny that. I don't think he would deny. If I said, do you think Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament is existential? I think he would say yes. I think that's the stance of most Christians, and it clearly matches up with existentialism, but yet existentialism as a word and as a movement didn't exist for, 2,000 years after that. Like, so it's so silly to me to think that you can't talk about something before the word existed. And so I don't know. I'd want to test his logic. I'd want to do an internal critique on him to see if all of this stuff actually like matches up. And I mean, he said that he's all into coherency, so it'd be interesting if all this stuff remains coherent or not. But yeah,
it's
you
so
just want to be bad faith and then blabber on so that like your audience can be like,
it's such an absurd statement.
Yeah,
and
this guy's
but
winning.
It explains how,
because he keeps saying that he's winning.
It explains how you're able to read back into
Jay,
history all these positions that
I
don't
know
exist.
that you're smarter than this, which means that I know that you're being bad faith right now. And there's nothing that I can do in a conversation other than be bad faith back. There's nothing.
I actually think that has to be true. That has to be true. Either it's an elaborate troll or it's bad faith. I don't think that if Jay was sitting here talking to somebody different and he wasn't being so aggressive, I don't think this conversation would go the same way. I do think he is smarter than he's leading on. And so I don't know what to make of this debate. I really don't. But yeah, I can't even award any points right now because I feel like Erudite has admitted also that she's just, being a shit back because he's being a shit. So it's like, well, all the arguments are kind of just shit right now. I mean, this is just nonsense.
All right.
This is a picture of me and Jay being friends.
Oh, there you go. That's very good.
Well, that's a debate. I mean, according to my objective metric of giving points, Erudite has won. Maybe that will get me hate, maybe not. I don't know. It depends on who watches this video, if anyone. But let me know what you think in the comments, and remember to like and subscribe. Until next time, goodbye.